We started recording. Beautiful. Okay, so this is welcome to the fifth Rules Advisory Committee meeting for the department's evaluation and revision of the groundwater allocation process. I'm Annette Lieb. I'm the Technical Services Division Administrator. Just a couple housekeeping things this morning. I think for all of you who are here in the room, you probably by now know where the restrooms and the drinking fountains are. We do have copies of everything that was sent out to you, which includes a meeting summary and agenda, new copies of divisions 8, 9, 300, 400, and 410, a summary of the comments that were received from both the Rules Advisory Committee members and the public. I just want to thank you all for your constructive and thoughtful comments. We really appreciate it, and we acknowledge that the work product is better as a result. And then also there was a copy sent out of the presentation that we're going to go over today. Our agenda today roughly is we're going to do introductions. Then we're going to just ask for any feedback on the meeting summary. And I want to acknowledge the hard work of staff, not only in putting together these meeting summaries, but in all the materials. Then we're going to go over the draft rules, and we'll have a discussion on the racial equity impact and physical economic impact. We will have public comment. So for those of you who are members of the public who have joined us, public comment will be at 11:30, and we request that you hold your public comment until then, and we'll wrap up with next steps. So with that, let's start with introductions, and I'm going to do an icebreaker this morning, so y'all can think about it. And I am going to try to alternate introductions between people who have joined us online and people who are in the room. The icebreaker for you to think about is what inspires you most about working on water issues. And so I'm going to start with the introductions, and we'll start with you, please, Casey.
Okay, Casey McClellan, Seven Hills Winery and Oregon Wine Growers Association. The inspiring aspect of this is basically providing for a better future for Oregon and equity across all constituents and members of this water community in the state.
Thank you. Online, I'm just going to go through the order in which I see people's names. So Cheyenne, if we could please start with you.
Good morning. My name is Cheyenne Haude. I use she, her pronouns. And people and life experiences and stories and play, just like the human aspect of water, is what inspires me.
Thank you. Zach.
Good morning, Zach Freed with the Nature Conservancy. Well, I really like springs, and I like hanging out in hot springs when it's really cold out. I like hanging out in cold springs when it's really hot out. I really like the biodiversity contribution of those springs to our rivers and wetlands and lakes in Oregon. And they inspire me. They're really neat.
Thank you. Dave Wildman.
Yes, I guess I would kind of reiterate what somebody mentioned already. What inspires me is just preserving a resource for future generations to use.
Thank you. Greg.
Greg Capillas, Pacific Hydrogeology, and representing Oregon Groundwater Association. I think what motivates me most for the work that I do is supporting the agricultural community, supporting farmers and nursery owners and vineyard owners, and all those folks out there who are growing food and fiber and other products, for a growing population.
Thank you. Karen Lowatsky.
I'm coming. Okay, here I am. Hi, my name is Karen Lowatsky. I'm the Water Program Director for the Oregon Environmental Council. I use she, her pronouns. And I think what inspires me the most about water and why I'm so interested in working on it is its pervasive role in all of our lives, both as individual human beings, as a cultural artifact, but also as part of the physical world that we interact with, whether it's farming, whether it's recreation, whether it's other ways of relating to water. Just that tie that human beings have to water fascinates me.
Thank you. Jen?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jen Hubert with the Deschutes River Conservancy, and I grew up on rivers and on a small farm. So both of those are very important to me. Just making sure that we are sustainable with our use of water is important to me.
Thank you. Kelly Warren?
Yeah, good morning, Kelly Warren, CTUIR. I've just always liked water since I was a kid, and when I chose a second career, it was hydrology.
Thank you. Tammy?
Tammy Wood from the Oregon Lakes Association, and I guess I just feel like I've been given a great gift really to enjoy the waters of Oregon, and I feel a certain sense of responsibility almost to do my part to manage those responsibly and allow people in the future to have the same gift.
Thank you. Lauren?
Hi, Lauren Poor, Oregon Farm Bureau. And I would say it's because water is so important to Oregon's future. And also, in addition, if Oregonians value local agriculture as much as they continually say they do, we just have to remember that we can't take agriculture out of the discussions of how we use water. We need to make sure that there's water there for our agricultural producers if we want to continue to have locally sourced Oregon agriculture in the state.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, Lisa Brown with Water Watch of Oregon. And I think what inspires me is just the opportunity to work for healthy rivers and aquatic ecosystems and all of the species that depend on them and that don't necessarily have a direct voice in a lot of the policy discussions.
Thank you. Michael Martin?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's a stewardship of a resource that we all share in common is what inspires me. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Good morning, Jeff Stone, Oregon Association of Nurseries. You think about the multiple use of water and how really there's not another element that kind of binds us all and kind of has so many applications. And for me, what inspires me is that it makes good beer.
Thank you. So we do have more Rules Advisory Committee members online than we do in the room. So I'm just going to round out the introductions with the remaining members who have joined us virtually. And we'll go to Nick next, please.
Yeah, hi, Nick Seiler, Oregon State. I'm an atmospheric scientist. So I studied the water from that perspective, not as a hydrologist or hydrogeologist, but I study the impacts of climate change on water resources. So the idea of helping society prepare for the impacts of climate change, I guess, is what inspires me.
Thank you. Phil Brown?
Yeah, Phil Brown, Northwest Groundwater Services. I'm currently without a voice today, so I'm gonna have to let it go at that.
Thank you for joining us. Robin Cook.
Good morning. Robin Cook, hydrogeologist with GSI Water Solutions. And I think as a hydrogeologist, it's striving for that balance between using our resources sustainably and providing people the water that they need.
Thank you. Adam, I'm sorry, I forgot you were at the end of the table. Go ahead.
I think I'm on the OWRD team today. I wonder if that was on purpose. Good morning, I'm Adam Sussman with GSI Water Solutions, and I'm here on behalf of COCO, Central Oregon Cities Organization. And, you know, what inspires me is working on really gnarly statewide water issues and policy issues and actually using science to come up with good policy solutions statewide.
Thank you. Susan Smith, who actually wins the award for joining us from furthest away, I think.
Yes, I'm in Joensuu, Finland. Joining you from Finland. What inspires me is the centrality of water to life. And I regard it through the eyes of faith as sacred. And because of that sacredness, that it is incredibly important to share it equitably and justly. And that's what I hope we will continue to do in Oregon. Beyond that, I'm a paddler. I love water because I like paddling.
Thank you. I do not see Bill having joined us today.
I think
He may
he's
be
in
at the
Finland
same
too.
conference.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any Rules Advisory Committee members who have not introduced themselves? Okay, thank you. We'll do a quick round out of introductions with the staff team that we have in the room. I've already introduced myself. We'll go to Travis next.
Hi, I'm Travis Brown. I'm a hydrogeologist in the groundwater section.
I'm Justin Iverson. I manage the groundwater section. Laura Hart, water policy analyst and the rule writer of this effort.
And Ben Scandella, groundwater data chief.
All right, just a couple other things. We will try to, I'll check in with you all about when we need to take a break. We generally would take a break around 10 o'clock. If you need to take a break before then, please just do so. I may need to do that in case these folks will be very able to keep things moving. And with that, we will start with our first agenda item, which is the meeting summary. Ben.
So you all received by email the summary of comments that, or excuse me, not comments, the notes from our previous meeting. We did our best to faithfully transcribe and summarize the contents of the meeting and reconcile that against the video, but we'd welcome any corrections that you all would like to suggest based on comparing that with your experience.
17 pages of meeting summary.
I just appreciated it when people look smarter than the official minutes. But that's all.
And also maybe I'd add, I believe we've also updated the RAC 3 meeting notes based on feedback from the RAC.
So seriously, you guys do a great job with the minutes.
Thank you.
Not seeing any hands raised or comments. So, yeah, thank you. And I will just acknowledge that staff actually do go back and listen to the recording, so.
There's 4 people.
Yeah.
All right.
So next up, we will step through the changes to the rules in the 5 divisions that Annette mentioned at the top. We're going to start with 300, go through division 8, 9, 400, and 410. We also provided the standout of RAC and public comments and responses. So presentation is going to roughly follow this. I'm going to hit on what struck us as the key major points. If I forget anything or you have questions on something that I've glossed over, by all means, let me know and we can go back and do that. Yep.
Can I just ask a general question, which, well, maybe it's been answered already, but what does staff think about the timeline of the RAC meetings and completing our commission? We got a meeting 6, I guess, September.
Yeah.
But
Thank you for that question, Casey, and we'll we do have a slide on that at the end, but just to, we are gonna have a 6th RAC meeting. We intend to hold a 90-day public comment period from the beginning of November to February 1st. And then the commission meetings haven't been set yet for next year, but right now we're looking at a March commission consideration for adoption. And the last slide of today's meeting will talk a little bit about topics that we are intending to address at our next RAC meeting.
Okay. And so in addition to the questions or comments and responses document, which gets at a lot of other kind of general comments, there were, as Annette pointed out, the printouts of the 5 divisions and the red line and strike through for that. So we can follow along on that too, but that's essentially what I've got on the slides for the most part. So want to start out again with the objective reminder. Sorry, let's see if I can move this thing at least over here. Let's see what it goes. Across the top. Great. How about down here? No.
From the top, you can minimize it.
Oh my gosh. Should I
That's good.
just leave
That's
there?
good. I
Okay,
think
I'll
it's
just
good.
leave
And
it.
no, I'll be tracking it here.
Okay, great. So our objective reminder here is again, summary of the commission's request to us. Way back in December of 2021, I believe, was update groundwater allocation rules to be more sustainable and protective of existing water right holders, both in stream and out of stream. Last couple RACs, there was some light discussion about what does sustainable mean. So this is kind of my one graphic slide for this segment of the presentation. I looked around through the literature. There are a lot of different proposals for what groundwater sustainability is. There's lots of different ideas through time, but this paper from 2020 by Gleason and others, the paper in whole summarizes a bunch of the proposed definitions of sustainable groundwater use that have been provided. And this is their synthesis proposal as of 2020 for a definition that groundwater sustainability is maintaining long-term dynamically stable storage. I've put in there water levels and flows, and I've added from recharge to discharge areas of high quality groundwater. There's a plot on the right here from that paper. You can see part B perhaps, so it's just an excerpt of a larger plot. But essentially, the Gleason definition is the blue line on top that varies within a range that they call dynamically stable range. And that is what we have tried to capture in our definition of reasonably stable groundwater levels, which we'll get to later. There's some other lines on this hypothetical hydrograph for strategic aquifer depletion, managed aquifer depletion. Those are described more in the paper. We put a link to that paper on the website for the RAC rulemaking, and it's cited in small text down at the bottom there. If folks would like to learn more about those, but for Oregon, our legislative policy is to maintain these reasonable stable water levels. And our commission has asked us to make sure that our allocation process supports sustainability. And we're really focused on this dynamically stable range of water levels, as opposed to the strategic or managed decline model that some other states have taken. So I'll let Scott in here. Okay, Adam. go
Oh,
ahead.
wait, is that, hold on, just a minute, please, Adam. Is that a new RAC member who just joined, Scott White? Which Scott
I
joined?
believe so.
Hey, Scott, will you please introduce yourself and the icebreaker question that you missed earlier is what inspires you what inspires you most about working on water issues?
I'm sorry, is that aimed at me? I just got my audio working.
Yes, please introduce yourself and tell us what inspires you most about working on water issues.
Okay. I'm Scott White. I'm with Klamath Drainage District. down here in Klamath Falls. What inspires me most about working on water issues is probably everybody needs it, at least in my country, and I think largely west-wide, everybody is struggling to keep it. And I love solving the problems of ensuring that people can continue using it.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Yep,
Adam.
sorry I'm late.
No problem. Adam, you have a comment about this slide?
About sustainability, yes. Adam Sussman, on behalf of COCO, I sent you all an email last night. I'm not a hydrogeologist, I'll tell you that. But the hydrogeologists that I work with, I just want you all to know that the concept of sustainability is not like everybody agrees on what it means or how to interpret it. And there's a whole bunch of USGS hydrologists, Meisner, Thies, I can't even pronounce this guy's name, Lohman, Alley, and Leak, who all sort of have suggested that the term sustainability is kind of a myth. And there's a quote from a paper from 2004 saying sustainability, like safe yield, is a value-laden concept and one that in many respects is in the eye of the beholder. And that's in that Alley and Leak paper from 2004. So I appreciate what Justin's saying. I just want to make the point that it's not like a universal concept that all hydrogeologists agree on.
Any other comments? Casey?
I have a question for Adam. So does the GIS hydrogeologists have a better metric or idea that would encompass the goal of sustainability?
Yeah, we've made lots of suggestions. So happy to keep making them. Yeah.
And we'll share those comments as well with this group again. Greg?
Yes, Greg Capillas. We see these kinds of patterns in a lot of places. I mean, I work mostly in the Willamette Valley, so I can only speak for where I have direct experience. But, we see a lot of areas in the Willamette Valley where we see this kind of pattern. We see this sort of dynamic stability occurring. And the problem that I see, one of the main problems that I see with the proposed rules is that we could have an application for a new water right, and the water levels could be showing that we've been maintaining this dynamic stability, but yet because of the way the rules are written, the model, and the very simplified models that are used to estimate the impacts, it's almost, without question that the application will be denied because the process will show that there will be some impact on the nearby stream. Even if we're showing that we have stable water levels, we've been maintaining this dynamic stability, that application will nevertheless be denied because the process is dependent on the data that's in the WARS system. And we can talk about that a little later, but we went through we spent a lot of time, large part of one meeting talking about the WARS system, but I guess honestly, I still have a lot of questions, I think, about how the data is generated in WARS. What does it really mean? And I think it would be useful if we could, I don't know, spend a little bit more time, or if I could have a chance to talk to somebody in the department and maybe educate myself a little bit more on that as well.
Tammy?
Yeah, I'd just like to weigh in that I actually really like this definition of sustainability, and I think it's clear, it's simple, and it also encompasses a lot of, subtle complexity. The axis is suitably vague, time and years over multiple generations, leaving open, the reasonable interpretation of what is the time scale of the variability that we're looking at for the specific system under consideration. I just wanted to say I do like that.
Zach?
And I just wanted to continue to draw a distinction because this is helpful for me, at least, it might be helpful for others. This figure is about sustainability, which was one of the two criteria that this RAC is charged with trying to maintain, right? And that's more related to reasonably stable water levels, excessively declining water levels. And that's distinct from The other objective, which is being protective of existing water right holders, that's where substantial interference comes in. That's where the fully allocated streams come in and the potential for impact on stream flow, right? So these are kind of two different, highly related, but different conversations, right? About two different objectives. And this one's more pertaining to the reasonably stable and sustainability objectives.
So the graph, I agree, focuses on that. The definition contains this dynamically stable flows as well. So the flows aren't necessarily graphed, but it recognizes that the source of water to wells is a combination that changes over time of storage, which we want to keep in a dynamically stable range, and capture of the through flow from a recharge area to discharge, usually commonly at streams. And so the written definition captures both of those. And those effects on existing users, that's, you know, we want to be protective of existing users in the prior appropriation system. And so you're right, it's all intermeshed. So.
Other comments? Adam?
Yeah, this is a great discussion because to me, I don't know that we've had this discussion in this group that, you know, we've talked a lot about the mission of this is to talk about reasonably stable water levels and capacity of the resource, because those are two of the criteria in ORS 537-525, which is the legislative policy that you all are implementing. But there are other things in 537-525 that we're not talking about. So, you know, and I'm gonna keep harping on the Deschutes Basin as an example. I mean, there are aquifers where what we're not talking about is maintaining adequate supplies of water and conserving maximum supplies of groundwater for other uses. So when you're looking at the system and you're thinking about sustainability, to me, there's that criteria as well in 537-525 that we should be thinking about. We're really focused on two things in a long list of things in 537-525.
Other comments on this slide? There are no comments in the chat. So thank you for everybody's comments.
All right. So let's see, with that, we'll move on to the changes that we've made over between RAC 4 and today. Reminder of how the slides are laid out here with the rule language currently in black text and the proposed new or revised rule language in red text. Things that we've struck through in gray are deleted rule language. So we've made them in gray to acknowledge they're there, but try not to detract from what the actual proposed language is. And the yellow highlights are the new changes since the last draft rule came out set. So what we changed between our last RAC and today. Okay. So with that, we'll start with division 300. That's kind of the top line. How to assess new applications for water rights. And we're focused on just one definition in that division 300. That's definition 57 of water is available. Reminder that we have separated out the surface water components. So all that black language is language that was already there, and we've clarified that will apply to surface water as it does today. And then for groundwater, we added D, E, and F. This one highlighted yellow change that we've made is to remove impair. There's in the statute, there is a lot of impair or substantially interfere is all lumped together. We recognized as we were going through these rule revisions that what we're really concerned about is the substantial interference piece. And so you'll see that we've just removed impair. That doesn't remove it from the statute, but it removes it from the things we're defining, and now we're looking at them to keep it focused on substantial interference, and you'll see that change also in Division 8 and Division 9 rules as we get to there.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
I'm still not sure why you took impair out, because aren't we also talking about, for example, the stream flows that we were just discussing as part of sustainability? And so isn't really our task broader than, it definitely includes this substantially interfere with existing rights, but it's a broader task, right? So I was actually a little concerned about the dilution of impair out of the definitions.
Yeah, so we, in looking at what we were defining with groundwater interaction with surface water, it had almost, it has to do with the concept of interference that's spreading of a pumping cone of depression to intersect a surface water body. And then is that interference substantial? And our definitions in Division 8 says it's substantial if that surface water already exhibits what could be construed as impairment, right? If it's already over appropriated, if it is being regulated regularly, if in-stream flows aren't met, if it's withdrawn by rule. So the way in which groundwater is interacting with surface water in these rule sets and how we're assessing a new application has to do with, is there substantial interference or not? And that substantial interference then kind of plays into it. It just, yeah, it seemed to be appropriately tighter and more focused if we focused on substantial interference, and that's what we have made that change.
Yeah, it just seems like you're talking about an administratively withdrawn area, for example.
Yeah.
Impair seems like the better term. I mean, does substantially interfere only relate to existing rights? In which case,
No,
too narrow.
substantially interfere relates to. So I guess what I would say is there will always be, in a hydraulically connected system, pumping groundwater will always interfere with surface water. And the question is not, does it interfere, but is that interference substantial? And so that's the test we're looking at in the allocation review. And we recognize that impair wasn't like we're looking at, is the interference substantial, which it just impair seemed vaguer and left open. So.
Right, I'll give some written comments on it.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
Jeff Stone, OAN. I, from my non-technical brain, I think this is cleaner. In my view, substantially interfere implies potentially impairment. And so that's why I think the whole order is not necessary.
I think that was the intention. Tammy, and then Zach.
Yeah, I don't, this is going backwards just a little bit, so I apologize, kind of breaks things up a little bit, but. So right here, and I know there's been a lot of discussion about what's the appropriate terminology, so water source and water body. So all I'm wondering is whether we could just in our list of definitions here include, a definition of surface water source so that we know it's clear that it's referring to lakes, wetlands, streams, rivers.
Okay, we'll look at that. Zach?
Zach Fried, Nature Conservancy. Just for the non-attorneys at the table, including myself, can you tell us what the distinction between impair and substantially interfere really is?
No, and that's why we took it out.
Okay. Reasonable. Yeah, fair enough. But functionally taking it out maintains the exact same meaning that was there before. It's just a simpler language. Thank you for clarifying.
I am not seeing any raised hands on.
Okay, I'll just note, and again, this is captured in more detail in the write-up that had been brought up earlier, concerns about creating a linkage to a groundwater surface water standard in the proposed new rules that wasn't there in the existing, and how that related to the Deschutes mitigation program. And you had two suggestions. One dealt with F here and the capacity of the resource, and the other was with overdraw. And we have left capacity of the resource because that also includes other factors such as thermal interference, like less common, but comes up every once in a while. And we have modified overdraw, and we'll get to that in the Division 8 part in a way in which we think addresses the concerns with the linkage with the mitigation program. So okay. Any final questions on that, on this definition of water is available before I move on to? I'm sorry, I realize that this is covering up.
Not seeing any, but I'm watching online.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're going to Division 8 now?
I'm going to Division 8 now.
It just
Yep.
seems like in my head, the logic is we just went through water is available, which refers to terms which are then in Division 400, which then take you to Division 8.
Yeah, there's
In
some.
my mind, it seems like you would go wherever you want, but it seems like we're skipping a step.
Fair enough. Just to clarify, the reason we're doing that, or I'm doing that, or I've chosen to do that here, is that the definition starts out with groundwater is available if groundwater source has reasonably stable water levels. That's in Division 8. If it won't substantially interfere with existing rights to appropriate surface water, that's Division 9. If the proposed use is available in the capacity of the resource, that's Division 400. And I acknowledge 400 brings us back to 8, but we will have gone through the 8 stuff. So when you see the changes to 400, you'll have already seen the changes we made to 8. So that's, I understand it could be organized in a variety of ways. And again, our goal was to try and cut down on all these loops. And I think we've done that a little bit, but yeah, haven't totally eliminated them.
And I just want to acknowledge, since Jeff asked me in the sidebar, we will put together a new flow chart prior to our next meeting. Okay, I think everybody seems to agree that would be helpful.
All right, so Division 8 edits here. First one was with respect to the annual high water level definition. Had a lot of comments and discussion at RAC number 4 about this, and kind of the culminating comment was, do we really even need the last 2 sentences? So we took that RAC advice and struck those last 2 sentences and left annual high water level as it was, with the addition of static. So we want to make sure that we are looking at static water levels on something that might be dynamic with respect to other anthropogenic impacts. So thank you for that constructive discussion, and that's what came out of that. Moving on to the next definition of aquifer, we had some outstanding comments from maybe RAC number 2 about the definition and making sure that we took into account that we would expect gradual changes in water level, water chemistry, and water temperature along a flow path. We discussed and considered other potential definitions. In the end, we believe that the similarly term accommodates natural and expected variation over space in a flow path. We also find utility in keeping this definition in Division 8 aligned with the definition in Division 200. And that said, we also added this varies gradually with location with respect to the characteristics, so that's not gonna be in the Division 200 definition, which is the construction rule definitions. But we've kept it relatively the same as Division 200 with that highlighted addition.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So this is a question sort of throughout the rules. So you have this definition of aquifer.
Yeah.
There's also the groundwater reservoir definition in 537, 515.
Yes.
And then I was a little confused as to what the difference is and why the rules, sometimes the rules use reservoir
Yeah.
when I thought maybe aquifer was a more appropriate term, so I just wasn't sure what the thinking was there.
Sure. So in my mind, the reservoir definition. Well, first, it's in statute and exists and we can't change it. It also accounts for administrative boundaries if those are more appropriate for management. So we've tried to use that groundwater reservoir, not necessarily in the allocation context, but writ large, for example, in the Division 512 rules that we're building on. We're using that term that links directly to critical groundwater areas and also allows for us to draw a boundary that is easy for folks to understand where it is and allows for or parts thereof, which allow for sub areas. So I haven't specifically told you what separates it. Aquifer occurs throughout the rules as a more colloquial term, kind of a, you know, when you see it, but it's similar to the sustainability definition. There's a lot of proposed definitions that try and come from a lot of different angles and they're all slightly different. And this is the one where we've settled on is most functional.
Susan.
Yeah, I had the same set of comments that I sent folks, which was that I didn't understand the difference between the two. And I understand why you would maintain a statutory definition if the statute uses it, but it seems like to me that it might be well to go back through the various divisions that we've looked at, because I think you find that groundwater reservoir does get used frequently, and it seems like to me that it would be better if it was aquifer in most cases.
Okay, thank you. Not turning into any other comments.
Okay. A couple minor changes to declined excessively and excessively declining that we put in. First of all, we wanted to take the definition that used to say lowering of the water level, and we put annual high in there to link it to our new definition and unify kind of the definition of the starting point for our various water level trend operators. We also went in and added some rule references for some other defined terms like economic pumping level. We'll touch on that here in a moment. And the part C that remains the same as we talked about during RAC number 4. So we've taken all the various capital ABCDs here that were similar, but substantially similar, very much the same as what was already in substantial interference. We've just referenced down to just one set of these criteria that, again, the wording is essentially the same in all the definitions. So we're trying to unify it to just one. So we pointed that to substantial interference as well.
Yeah.
I just have one thing on this one. This refers to section 8.
Yes.
Which is now 10 on here. So I don't know if the sequencing is just
Yep.
If it's been shifted or if it's just messed up within the,
Yes, the numbering changed when we took impairment out of the definition of impairment, substantial interference or undue interference. Left it with substantial interference, and to keep them alphabetical, that rejiggered the numbers.
So it sounds like we need to go back and look at the numbers. And
yeah, make sure that they're all referencing the right.
Yes, yeah,
Thank you.
thank you, yeah. All right. Yeah, thank you for catching that. I appreciate that. Okay, similar changes here. This is just further down the definition of decline excessively, putting in more references, making sure we're comparing to the annual high water level definition. And similarly for the excessively declining water levels, added annual high, added references. Okay, and now we get to some of the more yellow highlighted items. So we did a number of things here. We removed impair, as we've already discussed, and that, as we just noted, made the numbering change. We added in 10A here additional language just to explicitly tie substantial interference to the Division 9 criteria. So it wasn't specific. We had talked in previous RACs about not pointing directly to Division 9. That Division 9 kind of hung out there on its own with this preamble as a guide to where to fit it in the process. So this makes a direct link. And then we had a public comment that pointed out that this substantial interference is used in more than just allocation. And therefore, we should be explicit about when substantial interference exists, and that only exists when a junior use substantially interferes with a senior use. So a senior can't substantially interfere with a junior user, but vice versa. And so all of these sub definitions, and again, these are the same, these get at the same thing as the excessively decline that we struck out. We added the senior priority dates to this.
Okay, hold up. Susan's got a
Okay.
comment.
Good.
Susan.
Yeah, just to remind people, I did take a crack at simplifying the language for 10, not to change anything substantively, but I think the public, the response to the public suggestion made it pretty complicated, and I thought just we might clean up that language. So I circulated it to everybody, and you have my comments.
Great, thank you, Susan.
I gotta make a question
Lisa,
or comment. Okay. So these seem like pretty major diversions from where we were prior to these comments. I understand what you're trying to do, I think. I like that was kind of nice, yeah. So, first of all, I think there's some ways I didn't see Susan's, I wasn't able to pull that up, but you know, like I think the term contributive groundwater appropriation, that's undefined. I think you need to clean it up, so you just refer to some term in the intro paragraph rather than making a new undefined term down below. That's one comment. Another comment is, it's not clear in the intro paragraph, if you really read the text, that it would apply to a proposed pumping. It really is talking more about as a result of pumping or otherwise extracting. I think we need, so I think the intent here is that it would apply to applications, right? Review of applications. So I think that needs to be made explicit. And then, you know, like you could say in brackets, groundwater appropriation or something, have a name for what these various extractions and proposed extractions are. I think it also needs to be really clear that we're not talking about transfers here. I mean,
Okay.
because a transfer can injure a junior. I mean, you can't do a transfer that injures a junior, right? And that is one area where the seniority doesn't matter as much.
Is that true?
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, and then there's just another kind of a big picture concern here with big A. Capital A. The difference between saying you can't deplete an already over appropriated waterway and then this new language, which seems to say, would seem to require an analysis of whether the pumping is the source of a surface water right? Is that the intent there? Because that seems like a whole different direction to go that is onerous.
Yeah, I'll clarify the thinking on that because that plays into another comment that I think you had, Lisa, further down the line about explicitly calling out impairment of ecological values or something like that. So essentially, the intent of this is to say that if you're interfering with a surface water source, that source has to have already had some right on it. So the protection for the ecological values is in the in-stream water rights. And the way things are currently done, and I think would, oh, let me be careful about that. Essentially, what this is saying is that that source has to have some use and that it could be tributary to a source that has use as well. But the protecting factor is that it's already been allocated to some use previously. So I'm struggling to find an example of.
Well, and
Well, how
I
could
think that-
it be over appropriated unless there's other water rights on it? If there's no other water rights on it, then there's no appropriation and it can't be over appropriated. So.
Well, I
it
mean,
has
here's
to
an
have-
example, you could have a diversion up high in a stream. You could have a groundwater application near it, but slightly downstream. And so are we now saying that WRD has to do a big analysis to determine whether that groundwater pumping is the source for a nearby surface water right? Because that's language, the source for a surface water right. What does that, I guess that's the question is, what does that mean in this? What is the analysis that would be entailed? And what's the intention? And what are you trying to do with that language? Because I guess that's what I don't really understand.
I think the intention is to recognize the prior appropriation component of it. And so if we need to go back and look at the language, we will do that.
Okay,
May I try a simple response? I think
simple's
that
good.
the source in that sentence is referring to the surface water source, not to the proposed groundwater appropriation. So I don't actually think, especially for a new appropriation, we don't need to analyze whether the proposed groundwater use would be itself the source for a surface water right, but just whether it would substantially interfere with the surface water that is a source for a surface water right. And like I think Adam just mentioned, that wouldn't a surface water right wouldn't be over appropriated unless there was some surface water right. So for any new proposed use, I don't think this requires any extra analysis beyond what WARS already does.
But I think
I
your
think
point
it
is
does.
well
I think it
taken,
does.
Lisa, just in terms of making sure that the
Yeah.
language is clear. And if you have suggested language changes, we would love to see them.
Yes.
And I see Susan also has a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to underscore Adam's comment, actually with a question. which is, are we going to have any surface water sources that are over appropriated, withdrawn, or restrictively classified where there isn't already some appropriation? My guess is that as a factual matter, it's not possible. And so the addition of this language, in addition to being kind of, the confusing language, I don't think it contributes anything to the rules.
Okay.
Jeff Stone, OAN, I would love to talk offline about the transfer side of the equation instead of going into a rabbit hole that I can't clearly define in my own head. And so I don't want to waste the time with a committee to have that discussion, but I would certainly like to have it.
Okay, we'll reach out to schedule some time.
Zach Freed, Nature Conservancy, just wanted to swing back because I am puzzling over this. So, okay, imagine the scenario that Lisa put out there, that there's an over-appropriated basin with surface water rights. Those surface water rights are creating a point of diversion at a higher elevation than a proposed new groundwater use. Does that require the department to do a modeling assessment or analysis of whether that proposed new groundwater use would then have up gradient implications on that surface water right? I see you shaking your head. No, okay.
Why not?
I don't.
Yeah, why not?
I don't believe so, because WARS, works on water availability basins. So if, as long as that upstream surface water right was within the same surface water availability basin that was determined to be impacted by the proposed groundwater use, I don't think any additional analysis would be required.
I think we should say that here. We should say if it's in the same WAB. Of course, there aren't WABs everywhere. Kearney Basin is a great example. It also has a lot of groundwater issues, but you should. This needs some clarification then.
Great.
Okay.
Excuse me, Lisa, it's called a WAB.
We call it sport, we call it scores now, so.
Are you from the East Coast?
Wow, sounds fancier. Some works out. Well, yeah, I would suggest that as a actual language.
Greg Capillas, I mean, it seems like this added language really only it has meaning if we're talking about evaluating an existing groundwater right, for substantial interference. Which I guess that's something maybe we'll get into a little bit. I have questions about how these new rules, might be applied to existing groundwater rights. That's my.
So we did receive, as Justin mentioned, comments that the language didn't clarify the prior appropriation system in evaluation of interference, and that was really the comment that we were trying to address here.
I get that.
And that was a public comment from somebody who's also engaged in the Division 10 and 512 rulemaking. So it did come, it wasn't an allocation concern. It was, how is this language cited in other places?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. And this shows same changes just further down the line in part D.
And probably another place we need to look at the language.
Yeah, and similar in part E. So again, this is just adding the seniority and.
Greg?
Yes, hi, Greg Capillas. I got a question about D, big D, where it says regulated, have been regulated off due to insufficient supply to satisfy senior service water rights. And so my question is, regulated off like ever, like once in 50 years, or I mean, that's okay.
Yeah, so it's undefined. And we envision it will operate similar to today, where there's a separate water master review for applications. And the water masters note on their review form, I regulate this system back to 1908 every single summer by June or something like that. And that gives a indication to the water rights caseworker about the health of that stream from those on the ground observations, kind of in addition to the WARS modeled assessment. So, so that's it's undefined, like if it was regulated once 50 years ago. It is not specified in rule what that exact cutoff date is, but I don't believe that would be a reason for.
Okay, so there's gonna be a little subjectivity involved and some professional judgment there. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
And that's the water master's professional judgment, not the hydrogeologist. And, okay, just want to touch on economic pumping level. So this is still part of substantial interference. This is B and C. Want to acknowledge that we have had some comments over time from the RAC about the definition of economic pumping level. It has a definition existing in Division 8. We haven't set out to change that because we don't have a better definition for it. It remains a term used in the statute. And so we talked about, well, should we just, is no definition better than the old existing definition? But since it existed in statute, we decided just to leave it as is rather than to attempt to change it. So we've added the word pumping just to keep the term economic pumping level consistent with this rule reference, but otherwise we haven't made any changes to that. And so that's where it stands. On C, we've had some comments about this definition. It's been colloquially called holding the offer to the short straw. It's been colloquially called race to bottom. Regardless of what that is, this definition, this part of the definition applies to interference between wells and not to is water available. So of the 4-part test, interference is a component of that, but from the very first day, we had decided that we were going to focus only on water is available of the 4-part statutory test. Water is available, injury, basic program rules, other rules of the commission. So we have not proposed changes to this definition because we don't believe that they play into water is available. So issues persist with how injury is defined with, commenters, but we haven't changed anything as part of this.
But yeah, and I'll just note, that was also a comment and description of scope that our acting director made to the commission when they talked about this rulemaking, so.
But, I mean, injury is part of how you, it is part of the 4-part
Yes.
establishing the presumption.
Yeah.
So are you saying that this cannot be considered this part of the rule as part of the injury assessment in allocating groundwater?
Let me turn that around and put in the affirmative. We will continue to assess injury as per this rule, and that will require that for a new use to injure an existing use, which, let me be clear, this is with the dynamic seasonal pumping interference drawdown, as opposed to the year-on-year recovery in the spring to reasonably stable water levels, right? So I want to set that aside. This is part of the summer dynamic interference, and we will require that the existing user have a reasonably efficient, fully penetrating. So yes, we will use this definition, and this definition doesn't say that we shouldn't be returning to reasonably stable water levels at the end of every recharge season in the winter, spring.
Okay, I'll reread it with that in mind. I don't think it says that.
Okay.
Might need to be clarified if that is what you think it means.
Okay.
Not seeing any additional. Oh, Casey.
Yeah, Casey, great. In C, the last sentence there, full penetration fracture, groundwater reservoirs. Is that something that applies to the deep basalt wells in Umatilla County's Walla Walla Basin? Is that an example? I'm just saying.
Yeah, correct. So those would be uniformly permeable. And because as you're drilling through the Columbia River basalt, I'll try and keep this real short, laid out over multiple lava flows, right? And the water is found in these thin interflow zones, and there's a big permeability contrast between. And we see water of different, at least head, sometimes temperature and quality from one in between lava flow to the next. And so we would say that they're different aquifers, different sources, and that it's not relatively uniformly permeable with depth. So another example we often use with this predominantly through fractures is southern Southwest Oregon example in the Ashland area, big granite plutons, they're rubble weathered and fractured at the top, and the fractures decrease with depth. And so we could say, well, it is all the same aquifer, but you get diminishing returns the deeper you go. So we aren't gonna hold a user to drill all the way through the granite pluton before we go for an interference complaint there. So that's an example of where that's been used. All right. Lot of yellow here in the overdraw and overdrawing. So as I mentioned, been division 300. We made this change in part because Adam drew our attention here with respect to the Deschutes mitigation rules. Also, well, what Adam pointed out was this provides another definition in which we talk about groundwater pumping reducing surface water availability. And we want to make sure that all of the groundwater surface water interactions are routed through Division 9 and are handled through that process. So we've removed all that B and below that has to do with groundwater surface water interaction. We've removed it from the definition of overdrawn, and we are relying on Division 9 and then the substantial interference definition to handle those situations. One other change is that with respect to the definition as it stood with respect to balancing recharge and pumping, which Adam brought up, is not his long list of citations relates to this, admittedly. Okay, but that being said, still a statutory term. We've kept it in there. We've defined it not as artificially produced water, but issued groundwater rights. So in making comparisons of recharge to a groundwater reservoir or part thereof, compared to actually issued authorized use. So we don't have to go calculate what the actual use is. We can compare the sum of the paper water rights to the best estimate recharge.
Lisa?
Okay, I have two comments.
Yep.
The first is just related to the Deschutes program. You know, it sunsets January 2029. So I would strongly advise or request that we don't design these rules around that program. I mean, I think we need to be really careful how these rules relate to that kind of statutory sunset. But on this definition specifically, so if you go back to the sustainability slide at the beginning, the Gleason definition, right? It has both the reasonably stable levels and the stream flow. It seems like this, so as what you're just saying, right? This definition is just focused on the recharge. So which is fine if we want to keep those separate, but then, for example, in Division 410-00701, where we say the policy is just to prevent clear uses of groundwater from, groundwater from being overdrawn by new uses. I think that's too narrow, right? Because that's then ignoring the stream flow piece. I mean, it's almost like the old equilibrium approach.
Yeah.
Right, where you'd say, yeah, we can pump all the recharge.
Yes.
And then there's nothing left for the springs. We're gonna dry up Summer Lake, whatever, right? So I think if this definition is going to be this narrow, we need to go back through and make sure that when we talk about things like the policy, that we're also capturing the other important piece, the sustainability, which is the maintaining and protecting the discharge to the streams.
Yeah. So I agree with your statement that this gets at the old concept of pumping all the recharge, right? This is in the 1955 statute, and whatever the thought process was at that point, this is in there. And it's in there alongside reasonably stable water levels, and in there alongside if groundwater pumping substantially interferes with existing surface water rights, then I forget the exact term of the statute, but control be authorized, right, if it exists or intends. So this by itself, I agree, is not sustainable. That doesn't meet the commission's intent. This alongside the other components in statute that we've redefined as a whole, I believe does support with the commission's objective. And again, similarly to economic pumping level, it's in statute. We feel it's better to have it defined somewhat than not defined at all. And we don't want to have multiple definitions of how we deal with groundwater surface water interaction. We want to only look at Division 9 as opposed to saying, well, what about that definition of overdrawn that's similar but different? We want to eliminate that and just have one place to look. So that's hopefully my
I just think that
Tammy's frowning, so I don't know that I've made.
Well, and Susan also has her hand up. So, Lisa, did you have a follow-up?
just my follow-up is just, there are several places where like we're saying that the policy is just to prevent groundwater from being overdrawn. I don't think that is the policy. I think the policy is broader than that. It's also to prevent us from drying up the springs that Jack wants to go,
Yeah. So I'm hearing you say we need to go back to the policy statements and make sure that they include all of the elements.
Yes,
Got
thank you
it.
for saying that.
And if
Tammy.
you have one in mind that doesn't, could you point that out if you already know of one?
Oh,
Just
yeah,
to make sure.
I can do that.
We will go Tammy, Susan, and then Adam.
Well, okay, Justin pointed out as frowning, but, I was thinking. and-
Okay.
I get what you're saying, I think what's frustrating me a little bit is that several times in this process, we've gone through these contortions because there's something in statute,
Yeah.
and, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really care about this. Other than it seems like we've got these things that are in this statute that are messing everything up, and so you're just kind of like trying to, cover it over with these Fuji fixes thingies.
Yeah.
That are not satisfying, because we did clean this up with the very first meeting, this
Yeah.
whole thing here. But I guess I hear what you're saying, and so while it's not particularly satisfactory, I accept it for now.
I actually think it'll also be clarified when we update the flow chart. That will make it clear. So, and we will do that. Susan.
Yeah, I was just a little concerned about tying overdrawn to issuance of groundwater rights. And Justin and I had a discussion about the extent to which exempt uses constitute groundwater rights, and they do. But then if we say issue in this, it means that we don't necessarily take exempt uses into consideration when we decide whether or not the groundwater is being overdrawn.
Thank you for that. Adam, and then we'll come back to Lisa.
Adam Sussman on behalf of Cocoa. Not surprisingly, I disagree with Lisa that the sunset for the Deschutes mitigation program does have a current sunset of 2029. We have every reason to believe that that will be extended because there's a lot of people involved in it now. And just to remind this group, you may or may not be aware of the work plan confirmed by the commission, by the Deschutes Basin coordinator, saying that a top priority is to make sure that these rules don't unintentionally impair the mitigation program, which has already been presented to the commission. So, so I just wanted to say that. And then Justin, I just want to make sure I understood what you said, because this is where I have an overarching comment that these rules are really complicated. They have lots of loops, and we have definitions that incorporate multiple definitions, which I think is either a lawyer's nightmare or a dream, depending on what side of the issue you're on. And I, implore you to see if we can do better. Okay, but because, for example, the capacity of the resource definition includes the definition of overdrawn. And I want to make sure that I understand you saying that, one of the reasons that we were doing this rulemaking is the department kept saying, is it over appropriated? I'm not sure. So basically, this is the definition in a way of over appropriated, or is it a modified definition of over appropriated that is not going to result in the department continuing to say, I don't know, because that would be one of the 3 boxes that you would have to check to find that water is available.
Can we hold on to your comment till we get to capacity to resource, which is where we tried to address that?
Well, it's
concern?
also incorporated into part of reasonably stable water levels as well. So we'll come back. I'm happy to come back to it, but that's what I wanted to kind of start in Division 8, or I'm sorry, in Division, follow the path. Because there's a lot of swirling of these rules and interconnections that leave me baffled. I feel like I'm pretty good at reading rules and following them. I'm having a really hard time with this one, really hard time.
Yep. And I think what staff have tried to accomplish with a lot of these changes is to streamline so that we are only regulating or addressing through a regulatory mechanism particular outcomes in one place, rather than having them in multiple places.
I think what you might want to consider doing is, I think what you're trying to say is, we're going to issue a groundwater permit if the water levels are reasonably stable. I feel like you're on track to define that, even though I don't agree with it. That you pass or fail Division 9, and that it's within the capacity of the resource, and just say what those things are. Yep. Not try to say what those things are by referring to 12 other rules that sort of say what they are, because in the capacity of the resource, you're referring to declined excessively and excessively declined that have criteria of water levels and impairment, which are different than the ones in reasonably stable. It is blowing my mind how complicated and confusing it is. We can do better. I feel like you should take these rules and scrap them and get out of the whiteboard and say, what are we trying to say here? And define it, because it's really hard to find. And this is where it starts. We'll get into it more, and I'm happy to say more.
Doesn't everybody want to just take up a sheet one day and like throw it out?
Zach, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just have a really quick comment / question.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this as well, but just as sort of a request. Since if we're going to move towards a simplified definition of overdrawn and overdrawing, I think the flow chart that you mentioned will help. But I would just request that folks go back and look at where only overdrawn is used and make sure that correctly maps to when we only want to talk about annual recharge being exceeded by issuance of groundwater rights.
Yes, that's the intention. Yep.
And just, I'm sorry that I went off there. I'll be better behaved, but you never, I just want to answer, like, is this different than the definition of over appropriated, which the department has said, I don't know? Is this different? And if so, can you explain how? I think you did, but I want to make sure that I understood it.
Yes, and do you mind if we do that with capacity and
Yeah,
resources?
absolutely.
Okay, I will come back to that and absolutely share the path that led to this. Okay.
Comment in the chat too. Maybe we move on.
Karen, do you want to, Karen put a comment in the chat, basically articulating that, Karen, you want to offer your comment so I don't have to read it?
I'm sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. My basic thought, along with some others that I'll be turning in as written comments, is this ongoing reference that I hear us make to this flow chart. We've had a flow chart. Now we're going to change the flow chart. We're going to have a new flow chart, and that's great. Having a flow chart is going to be really, really helpful. I guess if this group needs a flow chart to understand the relationship of all these rules, other people will need that flow chart too. And I'm wondering if there's a way that that flow chart is officially and permanently affixed to this process, at least until the next RAC or whatever else changes. But you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yep. And we did send out a flow chart for the last meeting. So there are some minor changes that we will update prior to our next meeting. And if we get it done sooner than that, happy to send it out and make it part of what's available on the website.
I think my question is not, where is that? I understand that you're going to do that because you folks are really good at that. It's like, when this process is all done, does that flow chart, when the RAC is done, and let's just say everything goes through the way it is and the flow chart accurately reflects the new rules, will that flow chart live someplace that everybody knows where it is and it's used as a reference in the way that we're agreeing to use it for this conversation? Or is that flow chart really just for this conversation? Does that
I
make sense?
appreciate that. Yes, it does make sense. And I think we will probably need to seek some guidance from DOJ about how to accomplish that, whether that means it's a figure in the rules or whether it lives somewhere else.
Yeah, and at the least, I think we can commit to putting that on our website.
Absolutely.
Like we currently, for the current rules and the current process, we have a web page that has links to presentations and videos about how the current process works. We'll do the same thing for, the final new process, assuming that new rules are adopted in March, and we will include the flow chart there. At a minimum.
We have one more definition to work through before we go to Division 9. So I'd like to suggest that we do that and then take a break. Does that work for folks? Okay.
Okay, so moving on to the definition of reasonably stable groundwater levels. A lot of discussion went into this at RAC number 4. And so I'll say that there were arguments for a more stringent definition, arguments for a more lenient, if I can use those terms, definition. We, in the end, have assessed both those and have stuck with the half a foot a year over a time period between 5 and 20 years, and no more than 25 feet total. We believe, well, those we iterated to based on looking at a large number of hydrographs throughout the state. So we tried to obtain values that fit for conditions we would observe in Oregon. We included this range and this time duration in order to account for water level variability in response to decadal climate cycles, as well as shorter duration El Nino Southern Oscillation climate cycles. So this proposed definition takes that into account. And also it is in relation to the excessively declined definitions as well. So so this 25-foot total, we believe that both counts for almost any water level fluctuation in response to climate cycle variation that we have evidence for in the state, and is in relation to stopping issuing rights before we reach the excessively defined value, so that we have some period of time to discuss voluntary agreements or other types of action before we get to the trigger for a critical groundwater area. So for all those reasons, we've stuck with our same thresholds of no more than half a foot a year over this 5 to 20 year averaging period, no more than 25 feet, or in the case of relatively thin aquifers, 8% of the greatest known saturated thickness. Okay. And I'll just say before we get to questions, the one big highlighted line here is we were trying to address the RAC comments that we define the minimum data collection amount to make a finding. So we put this in to try and be more clear about, in the case of no data, where our proposed rules on the next slide or the slide after say, in the absence of a positive finding of reasonably stable water levels, we're going to not issue a new right until we have that data. This is intended to get at how much data is necessary, right? That's two measurements between one nowish and one between 5 and 20 years before.
Justin, if we could click through the rest of the definition and then go back to comments, because there was one significant addition, and I think we should talk about the definition in its entirety. I saw Greg had raised his hand, Robin has her hand up, and then Casey. But let's go through the definition in its entirety and then come back.
Okay. In B here, we again reference back to the annual high water level. In C, we got at this concept that we have currently, because currently we flow through this existing definition of over-appropriated, which we've changed in these proposed rules. But we wanted to put back, if groundwater hasn't yet been extracted or authorized for extraction from a groundwater reservoir, then we're going to presume that the water levels are in dynamic equilibrium and make a finding of reasonably stable water levels. So, for example, some far out place that's far from any development, we'll assume is in dynamic equilibrium until the first allocation's been made and we have data back from that. Counter example is Columbia River basalt, some fault blocked valley where we have very old water rights that don't have any recording or, measurement or reporting conditions. So we know water is being used, but we don't have good water level data there. We will not assume that that's reasonably stable. We'll require at least these two measurements to assess that before we issue more. So.
And
thanks. Okay, part D retains the ability to supersede these rules in a basin program rule. So if local interests would like to have a more stringent or less stringent rule for definition, for reasonably stable, we believe that the basin program rule process is the appropriate place to put that, to have it in effect and have it go through a public process for that local area. And E is notwithstanding any of that other part of the definition. If the definition of declined excessively or excessively declining is met, then, by this definition, it can't be reasonably stable. So there might be an example I can think of in Umatilla where we dropped 200 feet, we curtailed 80% of the use, and I don't know that this exists, but let's just say that it meets the less than half foot a year. But if it's already declined that much and we're already under active curtailment, we're not going to call that reasonably stable for the purposes of this definition.
Okay,
So
Greg, Robin, and then Casey, and then Adam.
Yeah, Greg Capillas. Okay, so I was looking at under reasonably stable, big capital, well, little a, big A, where you've changed the language to allow for, I guess, a determination based on two measurements. My initial knee-jerk reaction to that was you can't, how can you make a determination? How can you make a statistically valid determination based on two measurements? But then I guess when I think about it, and when you factor in the other things that go into it, the 0.5 feet per year, and then the over that time duration and so forth, then I think that, it kind of makes a little more sense to me, but I guess I still have a little concern about that.
Okay, Robin.
Hi. Yeah, my question is also about big A there. And if we need two measurements to calculate the rate, are we assuming that there's a water level available in the year being evaluated? And if not, then wouldn't we need to say if there are not at least two annual high water levels to be able to make that determination?
yeah, Ben, please.
The intent as it's written is that if you have a measurement in the year being evaluated, you only need one previous measurement. And that measurement should be at least 5 years earlier. So the two measurements should include the year being evaluated. Does that not come through?
No, well, because you don't always have a water level, right? If you're looking for a new location, is there a possibility that there might not be a water level in that year somewhere?
I guess I'd say if a measurement or if a level exists in the past, unless that well's been abandoned, presumably one could obtain a recent water level to compare to that existing one. And this is saying that existing one should be between 5 and 20 years ago.
So you're assuming that there's another well nearby that you can find a water level for if it's a new groundwater application that doesn't have an existing well.
Right. So if there's a neighboring well in the same aquifer groundwater reservoir that is representative, then we will look at that for a new application.
Okay. I think it's okay. I just got hung up on needing two measurements, and then if there's not at least one measurement, then I presume they're not stable.
Well, and let me take that a step further. So I think that what we were, I believe that the discussion at the last RAC was, okay, in an area with no measurements and no nearby measurements, does that mean that I need to, drill a well and take 5 consecutive measurements to establish that? And we're saying that we want 5 years of data at a minimum, but you could take one at the beginning and one at the end. So we're trying to be explicit about how many measurements need to be collected within that period.
So if the language isn't clear on that point, let us know how to clarify. Casey and then Adam.
Yeah, I'm particularly concerned with C as being essential for the, exploitation of new water sources where they may exist in Oregon. But yeah, that could be debatable, but so my concern was that this, I call it get out of jail free card, is applicable across the range of situations that our set of regulation addresses. Like this is applicable across what we're doing and not just a single specific instant. It's part of the definition and will apply elsewhere in the range of stat regulations we're addressing. You can answer me offline.
Yeah, I guess I just want to make sure I understand your comment.
I think it's a valuable comment for the future water availability, assuming that there are unexploited
Is
groundwater
your-
reservoirs.
Is your comment that the department should not be presuming that water levels are reasonably stable if there isn't any authorized or extraction from the groundwater reservoir? Is that I'm trying to understand your comment as well.
Overall, I strongly support the department's requiring affirmative
Okay,
conditions for is groundwater available, but C seems to say, well, if it's an unexploited reservoir, then that doesn't apply. We're actually assuming that water is available there.
Yeah.
okay. Adam?
So, two things, and the first one will be really brief. I just want to reiterate Coco's concern about the definition of reasonably stable. We strongly believe it does not make any sense with respect to the hydrogeologic setting and the stressors on the aquifer in the Deschutes Basin, and have provided multiple times examples of, maybe not the best example that you're happy with yet, but examples of how we could come up with a definition that could be used statewide. So that's number one, I've said there. Number two is, this is just an example again of my concern and frustration about the looping and complication of these rules in small, if you scroll down to E, where there's this notwithstanding, then it won't be reasonably stable if it's these things that you list. But those things are also listed in capacity of the resource, which is one of the criteria for whether water is available. So you've kind of said the same thing twice. And I'm not sure that that's necessary. So that's just an example of how these rules are repetitive, and you have definitions pointing to definitions, and that's.
Yeah, so, yeah, so understood, and in this case, that's explicitly there because we put in D that the definition can be superseded. But that definition, the superseded definition can't, say that if it meets the definition of declined excessively, my basin program rule says, oh, that's okay. I've got a new definition of reasonably stable, so.
Right, but in order to find if water is available, it has to be reasonably stable, and it has to be in capacity of the resource, which is already defined. So.
Yeah, from
You
allocation
need it,
standpoint,
yeah.
I agree, yeah.
It's very confusing.
Okay, we'll take another look at that.
That's just an example.
Other comments on reasonably stable groundwater levels?
This is Karen. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this properly, and I appreciate how deep some people are able to dive into this, but I am operating at a slightly less deep level, or maybe a very shallow level. But my understanding, if I read this correctly, is that reasonably stable will apply regardless of a decline in recharge or an increase in extraction. The way we're defining it is stable for other things that we can't control happening. Does that make sense? You see what I'm trying
I
to say?
believe so, yeah, and I think that's a good definition. The reasonably stable groundwater levels is intended to describe the natural variation in the system before pumping, right? So
Right.
if, and so we want to allow for that and have some thresholds where we've taken too much and we're pumping year-on-year storage.
Right, and so part of why in my simplified version of it, part of what I like about this is it does seem to give enough flexibility to take into account some of the unpredictability of perhaps climate change driven shifts in precip patterns, et cetera, which would affect the recharge, right?
Okay.
Well, that's
I
a
believe-
resounding silence.
I believe, no, I believe that's true. I'm just trying to make sure that I've taken in. I'm sorry, Karen, can you say that one more time?
Wow. No, I never listen when
No.
I talk. I'm happy to take this offline if we need to. I feel like you
Yeah.
answered my question and what I was trying to clarify. I'm happy to speak with you about offline.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you. And if you want to write that down and submit it as a written comment, that might help to parse out all the pieces.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Zach Fried, Nature Conservancy. I just wanted to say again what I've said before, which is I really appreciate the data-driven approach with the affirmative findings of evidence here to determine reasonably stable. The very first thing that I thought of when I read this new text is more or less what Greg said, which is that I feel like all time series statisticians in the general area probably got a vague headache when two measurements were determined sufficient to calculate a rate of change. And so I'm just curious if there's a way to make sure that the rules incorporate additional data so that it's not only two measurements and just stays as two measurements. Maybe something like two measurements are the minimum required to calculate the rate of change or something. Some way to specifically make sure that all available data are incorporated. And then I would also just follow that up by kind of bluntly saying that two measurements is really kind of insufficient to characterize rates of change in a cyclical system. So I would, really urge reconsideration of that and considering having more than two measurements as a basis for determining that.
Okay. Other comments on the definition of reasonably stable? I am not seeing any from our virtual participants. Zach?
Sorry, Zach Fried again. I forgot to say I did have one unrelated question / comment, which is in little d. I'm not an attorney, so I don't really understand when rules supersede each other and how that works, but can you talk about your thinking when you deleted the text, such a definition may not be less stringent?
Little d.
Yeah.
So we added E.
Because we added E, so we wanted to. It can't be less stringent. What we said at first was this definition of it can't be less stringent meant you could select something less than half a foot a year, you could select something less than 25 feet, but you couldn't select more.
Yeah.
And after internal discussions, we said, okay, if it goes through a basin program rule and somebody says for my basin, we want more than 25 feet, that we would allow that. So the change is not, you can make a basin program rule and have it be more stringent only. It can be more or less as long as it's no more than excessively defined.
Okay, and that was from only internal discussions. That wasn't from public comment or anything or RAC?
No, it was from public. I mean,
Okay.
Adams requested 8% of the full saturated thickness.
15.
Or 15, excuse me, 15% of the full saturated thickness.
Yeah.
Which would be 150 feet or more in the case that of the Deschutes Basin that he's pointed out.
Okay, I know we're veering towards the break, so I'll be quick, but I preferred the prior definition where it was setting a limit that could not be superseded. So I'll just stop there. Yeah, Ben.
I think an important part is that specifically it says only part A of the definition of groundwater, reasonably stable groundwater levels may be modified. So part E will stand no matter what. You can't take away that backstop of declined excessively or excessively declining through the basin program rule changes is the way that we have intended it to be.
Thank you, Ben.
Lisa, did you have a comment on this before we?
I'll do it in written. It's fine. I think it needs to just be clear that you're only superseding it for that particular basin. You're not really superseding it overall. So I'll do it right.
Agreed. We agree with that comment. Okay. We need to ask who the phone number is. Why? So we know who the person is that's doing that. Okay, so I am being asked that the person who has joined us via telephone identify yourself so that we can reflect you in the meeting summary. And that's a phone number that ends with 8297. Let's take a break and I'll ask again. So let's take a 10-minute break. And that means for the clock here in the room that we'll be resuming at 10:25. Oh, Robin, go ahead.
Yeah, just sorry, just a quick typo-y housekeeping thing. There are several instances under number 5, 7, and 10 where groundwater is still 2 words. Just to maybe go back to when everything's all done to revise those.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Robin.
All right, we will see you in 10 minutes.
That's like. Yeah.
Hey, can we maybe take a few minutes after the meeting to talk about this this one kind of issue with it's a client of ours and we've been we're going through reimbursement authority for a claim and
Well, I guess I'm glad at least that it's the minimum of the two.
multiple requests for a well that's, already been, approved for a pumping test. I mean, I went back and I looked at it. I don't know if you're gonna talk about this for a minute here, but I think, she sent me an email saying that, well, this was approved for a multiple well exemption, previously. Originally did a pump test and approved, and then we did it, and then there was another permit that used off to a well, and then she said that we submitted a multiple well exemption request and approved. Well, yeah, and I was thinking, wow, I don't think they ever, how do you submit a multiple well exemption request from a single well, right? Does that make any sense? So when I went back and looked at it, and I realized that I think she was just using the wrong terminology. Because there is a form for a pump test exemption, under programs. I don't know. Anyway, I think that's what she meant.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. I was Adam on the. You probably saw me. Trying to figure out where different words were used.
I don't know. Is it maybe a hardship?
Yeah, that's what it is. It's like a request for exemption on the pump test requirement, due to. And we did that once before, like I said, this state well, the second permit, and now we got a third permit that uses that well. And I went back and looked at it, I went back and looked at all the files. And I saw that we had done that. And I go,
Oh, yeah, no, so that again, that's like, I'm outside the lane there. If it has to be in this country, I'm just not fine with people. I did like.
Okay, so that's what then it's a little clearer and makes it more easier. I still not. It's nothing to that, and say, okay, it's done.
Well, no, so that's, you're not changing their previous practice, and we agree with you, and we talked about it as essential, and we're working on implementing that change.
So, okay, so how do we address this particular issue right now, because she's saying if she doesn't get a response back from me by, sometime this month. She needs to have
mostly allocated during August,
27th.
but there are other months where.
So I think the hardship is the multimedia thing.
One more. Yeah.
So
that farm.
that hardship.
Yeah.
What's the hardship? Well,
already done it.
Fish, and like wildfowl, waterfowl, and very wild. Most of all.
Okay, all right, good.
Okay, sorry, it's, we're doing that.
So you guys.
Yeah.
That's an issue, that's continued to be an issue, both with the wall and also the plan. In both cases.
That's the goal.
our state history. I was talking to a really interesting story for some people who have perspective on this one. But basically the history of water has been very, it's been like aggressively competitive between states. And states historically have been, yeah, they've been urged to do the reverse of that. Not work together, urged to, yeah, try to get as much water as possible for the state. That's led to some serious discordance between like these, you know, hydrology doesn't always follow state lines. So
How much time?
it's led to some serious issues of how we work with Washington and California, and even we're talking about the snake river.
It makes sense, why would we make that investment? As a junior.
Yeah, it's a sticky issue, but at the end of the day, what I really like about these rules is that
So what do you?
a really good step forward towards considering surface water and groundwater. as one whole
I
system.
think this was.
And so from a
Justin
hydrology perspective,
envisioned
that
that
has
this was
always been a
gonna
big,
be
always frustrated me that
maybe
these two totally distinct, totally separate things.
We're at.
As though once the water goes into the ground, it's suddenly different.
Yeah, I like the. comment there that-
That's a, that just makes common sense.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. Well, help not make things worse.
Yeah.
It will make things better.
No.
Yeah, I really appreciate the comments, in this kind of.
A lot of people
Showing up.
on there are quite a few. Yeah.
The organizer.
That's why I, Oregon.
Yeah.
Stays in. Stays there.
Because you're for the video.
Yeah, and we're down in the farm apples and sustainable farm grapes.
When they went back.
My family's been able to, since the 1880s, out in the Columbia Basin, so.
Wow, that's great.
I do believe we have to grow some food for ourselves. I mean, food security.
All right, and before we start with Division 9, I am again gonna ask if the person who has joined us on the phone could please identify yourself. And I see you've unmuted. We'd like to reflect you in the meeting summary.
Yeah, sorry, this is Gina Eastman at O-Word. I couldn't get myself unmuted in time earlier.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Gina. Okay, Division 9, back to Justin.
All right, so we're gonna continue going through the revised draft rules. Division 9 was again a place where we talked quite a bit in the last RAC and received some good language suggestions that we accepted. So first of all, right up at the beginning, again, we removed the impair from the substantial or undue interference. And there were some other comments regarding exempt use wells that we did not incorporate. Again, because the statute is our authority to make any of these rules, the statute lays those out, and so we left them out of Division 9 at this point. Got a suggestion to replace the context requires was stated. We incorporated that. And then I think no new changes until we get to definition 4, PSI. Again, took out impairment, stuck with the substantial or undue interference. The rest of the definitions remain the same up to Rule 40, Part 40. Again, had some RAC comments on the wording here of what potentially affected parties meant. So we have made this highlighted revision to specify that we would consider appropriate information provided in the application. So that would be by the applicant or their agents, or in the public comment period for the application. That would be by the, I'll say, interested parties at that point. So just want to be clear, right now, as part of Division 9, this concept is already included in the current rules. We're keeping this concept in the new rules that folks can submit information to us, and we'll take that into account when making determinations. So no additional changes until we get to Part 5, where we again remove impair. Also, I'll note that we had a lot of discussion about a proposal to define a time scale in rule at which impact would occur. We have retained the proposed language from before within the full term of the proposed or authorized groundwater use. The intention is that we assess the full impacts of a new or sometimes existing right. I don't want to get too sideways. For new proposed use, we want to assess the impact to hydraulically connected streams that will occur over the full term of that use. So there may be cases where the application is for a limited duration permit, a limited license, for example. It's going to be used for 1 year for road construction. Then we would evaluate the impacts over that term of use plus the decaying impacts that occur after the pumping stops and base our evaluation on that. In the case of a traditional, I'll call it a common water right application, where it would result in, if approved, a permit that would then be proved up upon and go to certificate. that certificate is essentially forever as long as use continues, and that's from my experience, the vast majority of the intent of people who have a certificated right, it gets passed down through generations. We want to assess that over that full proposed use, and that is essentially forever. So that's what we've used.
Casey, Greg, Jeff.
So 5, it seems to me that for someone to take advantage of this, you're like gambling a very large amount of money to put a well in, which, I mean, why do you even offer that it doesn't seem like it's a dependable source. Am I interpreting that incorrectly?
I'm not sure. So I read Division 940 sub 5.
Yeah.
For the purposes of issuing a permit, if we find a potential for substantial interference, then we've said that may mean water's not available if the use will substantially or unduly interfere with surface water. So essentially what we're saying is Division 9 is the process by which we assess, is this proposed groundwater use hydraulically connected to surface water? Will it have the potential to have substantial interference? So again, I'll come back to, I said, any groundwater use in a hydraulically connected system will impact surface water, but that is only substantial interference if the surface water is already over appropriated. So if you're impacting the Willamette River and there's water available for further surface water appropriation 12 months of the year, then the groundwater use will reduce the flow of the Willamette. Some small amount will debit that from WARS and issue a right. But if you're interfering with a fully appropriated stream, then a new use will further impact that already over appropriated stream. That's all lined out in substantial or undue interference definition that we went through in Division 8. And then we will say, okay, that potential for substantial interference is actually going to be substantial interference, and therefore we will not find that water is available for a new right.
I guess I'm not sure why may mean is still in there. It turns it into a vague.
Yeah.
Isn't it better to have something definite for your custom, for your, water users? I don't know, maybe it's not a big deal.
Okay, noted, yeah.
Greg?
Yeah, Greg Capellas, going back to number 4 there. Kind of a technical question. If you're talking about evaluating, use into infinity, I'm kind of wondering how you do that in, using the analytical models that you use, because you got to have a number to put in it, right? There's no way to put infinity into the model. It's not going to recognize it.
Yeah, so essentially we are then looking at the plot of the source of water to wells in that Barlow and Lake 2013 paper, where at early pumping time, you pump storage 100% for a little bit, and over the full pumping period, that the storage declines to 0 as the cone of depression spreads out, and once the cone of depression hits a surface water source, positive boundary in hydrogeologist parlance, then you're capturing surface water, and over time, 100% of a hydraulically connected stream, like that's the new equilibrium, right? You've lowered the water table, you've captured flow that would otherwise be surface water, and you're not going to chronically continue to collect stored water. If you are chronically collecting stored water, you're not well hydraulically connected, but that then raises the question of sustainability from the water level, reasonably stable water level perspective. So like the short answer to your question is, if the use is infinity, then in a hydraulically connected stream at an infinite time, 100% of your captured water comes from stream flow.
Well, that's assuming that all of the water that's pumped from the well is capturing water only from that stream.
That is correct. Yeah, that's a big.
It could be capturing water from other streams as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that kind of raises another question is, is there any way that you can sort of parse that out? Are you going to be able to do that?
Sure. Where we have a numerical model, we can model that between the modeled streams.
You say a numerical model, you mean like
Yeah,
a mod for.
that's correct. That's
Where you have numerical,
Yeah.
where you have numerical models.
Yeah, in the Willamette, the Chutes, Klamath, and soon the Harney. So Travis gave an example in RAC 3, maybe, of just that type of scenario of which streams, and again, those are the modeled streams, those aren't all of the small streams that we also care about, so.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I guess my question, that raises another question. I'm sorry to, I
Yeah,
don't mean
no,
to
that's
interrupt
fine.
you, but I mean, you talk about numerical models. I mean, that's like, that would be the ultimate. If we had a numerical model, you know, a well-defined, well-calibrated numerical model for every single scenario, right? But that's
Yeah.
not gonna happen. We know that won't happen.
Yeah.
And so the numerical models that you have, are they, you know, at an appropriate scale really to accurately model, you know, these things?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. Appropriate scale depends on the management objectives. So again, Travis's example was between major streams, right? The Willamette, the Put,
Right.
There's a bunch of minor streams in between there that are also fully appropriated and also receive groundwater flow. So how to parse those out, like right now, as came up in another question and answer session, we're working within the water availability basins. Understanding that that's an approximation, so.
Jeff and then Tammy.
So Jeff Stone, OEM, limited intellect plus conflation of issues is what I battle with constantly in this group. But the cone of depression figure really resonated with me, and I'm trying to square that with seasonality of pumping.
Yeah.
So from groundwater sources, so.
Yeah.
For example, that Oregon's really dry between, you know, July through September. So all the different water saving mechanisms that the nurseries do, they need to depend on when that need is, that to be able to pump.
Yeah.
So I'm just asking if these changes recognize seasonality. So that's how I read it, but I just want to make sure.
Right, so implicitly, yes, they do. So again, I point to the details in that Barlow and Leak paper that's linked online. It has a section that talks about seasonal pumping impacts, and the impact to stream rises, and then when you turn the pump off, it drops a little bit. But unless you're in a, I'll say high diffusivity is the technical term, unless the aquifer is super gravelly, or you're very close to the stream, the impact of pumping generally will persist until you turn the pump on again. And you'll get this kind of sawtooth shape where the general shape of the curve is maintained to where over a long enough period of time, you're gonna have full capture, full, you know, pumping groundwater from a hydraulically connected stream is going to fully capture the surface water. It'll take a bit longer to get there because you're getting some recovery, but not full recovery in most cases as you build toward that point far in time. So.
That's about the extent of my ability to
Okay,
understand.
so it doesn't often decline to zero impact before you turn the pump back on next summer. That's the answer.
Right.
Tammy?
Yeah, I was just gonna follow up a little bit on what Greg said, because it also relates to a comment I've made in the past, and I'm still a little unsatisfied here, is in the situation where, you know, you've got a proposed well that is far from, you know, a particular given stream, say, but you can imagine the cone of depression intersecting several.
Yeah.
Like, I still don't understand how that works in this structure. It doesn't seem to be explicit, because it's always a talk of like a single source. And I'm wondering, since you've talked a couple times about this flow chart, if that might not be a good time to sort of make explicit how that is handled, like how an inventory is created of the possible streams that might need to be looked at, and then how they're addressed, you know, either in parallel or sequentially or what.
Okay. Other comments? Adam, I don't see your hand up.
Division 9 doesn't apply to the Deschutes Basin.
Any other comment?
Okay. And so the final slides are Rule 50, that's the last part of Division 9. This relates to curtailment of existing uses due to hydraulic connection. 1 second, Greg. So our endeavor has been to not change the function of this part of the rule from the way it operates today. And the reason that there are some proposed changes is because there was language up in Rule 40 that was referenced in 50. And so because we've changed Rule 40, we have pulled that language down into Rule 50. So we've cleaned up groundwater, we've changed a bit of the wording here, and we have pulled in these suitable equations that used to live in Division 9-040 to -050. And we have pulled in this horizontal distance concept that used to be in 40 into 50, because that again is cross-referenced here, and that's it. So with that, great.
Greg Capillas. Yeah, so in my over 20 years of working in water rights, I don't think I've ever experienced any kind of groundwater regulation based on these rules here.
Yeah.
So when I saw that raised an immediate red flag in my mind, and maybe you can kind of try to answer that already. But so my question directly is, how do you see the department applying this new language here to existing groundwater rights?
So as we go forward into the future, through a bunch of experience, it's become clear that a critical groundwater area is the appropriate mechanism to regulate back groundwater users interfering with surface water. And we have historic regulation that's been happening for decades related to this on the Umatilla River, community ordinance gravel, that relies on this part of the rule. So.
Okay, so, but you're not gonna be like going after, starting to evaluate existing groundwater rights to see if they are potentially interfering with surface water and then applying these rules. And
Correct, that is not
cutting people off on their existing groundwater rights. It seems like this would give you authority to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so I don't know how much to say. That's not our intention, and yeah.
And as Justin already has said, these are the rules we rely on for management in Umatilla.
Okay, I'm just wondering if there's maybe some way we can make that a little more explicit. Maybe narrow it down so that it's not quite so open-ended, because I think you can understand that somebody from the public might be concerned that, if you leave it open-ended and open to interpretation, that down the road, that it could be interpreted to allow the department to start doing what I'm talking about, start going after, existing groundwater users.
Yep.
Well, so there is also in 2B existing language that says the department shall control the use of wells greater than 1 mile from the surface water source only through a critical groundwater area. So that is existing language that's in the rules today. So that.
Okay, great. That's greater than 1 mile, but we still have a lot of wells that are within a mile, and so. Okay.
Well, any other, go ahead, Lisa.
I think under prior appropriation, the proper thing really is to regulate the groundwater pumping if it's injuring the senior surface water user. So I guess I'll think about how to be more clear in this section, but I think that is kind of a basic tenant of the system. I'm not sure why it would. I mean, yeah, I guess I don't quite understand the concern, right? I mean, if you're a junior groundwater pumper and you're entering a senior surface water user, it seems like the right language. But we can talk about it.
Well, okay, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is that the department, even though they haven't in the past actively gone after, well, I mean, in certain areas, okay, but like I'm saying, this is not explicit at all towards certain areas, is it? It's not, it's open-ended right now as I see it, and I think we need to put some sidebars on it, if it's not intended to be open-ended. Then I think it would be appropriate to put some sidebars on it to make it clear and as far as what it truly means, what is truly the intent.
Okay, there were a couple people online who had their hands up. Dave, you put yours down. I want to make sure you didn't want to make a comment. Please go ahead, and then we'll go to Tammy, and then we'll come back to Susan online.
And sorry, I was kind of jumping ahead looking at paragraph 3 of this section. So if we need to continue talking about paragraph 2, I can hold off.
Hold on just a second. Is your comment about paragraph 2, Tammy?
Oh, it was just about, it was a general comment about the whole section and how it,
go ahead,
a little out of my wheelhouse, not being, again, a lawyer, but it just seems to me you haven't changed any ability here. Right, you haven't given yourself more ability to use this section, right? So, I mean, if you were gonna use it for more than the utility, the ability to do that already exists, doesn't it? And this does not change that.
That's correct.
Okay, and I would just echo what Lisa said, that, you know, it seems like this would be the appropriate thing to have in here, and the idea of calling out specific basins around the state by name in these rules in general, it should, I think, be done with great care, because they should be written more, you know, to apply more generally.
Okay, thank you. Susan?
I guess I'm echoing those sentiments. It seems like to me that it would be inappropriate to try to limit the ability for a senior groundwater appropriator to be to use the department to go back against a junior. Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can state it more clearly. With respect to review of existing groundwater appropriations, the department already has that authority, and this is the wrong place to withdraw that authority, since we're only talking about proposed applications.
Thank you. And I'll also note that Karen Lewatsky with OEC agrees with that comment as well. Dave.
Yes, thank you. So Dave Wildman with Anderson Perry and Associates. Just to kind of a semantics thing, but in paragraph 3, where we talk about the nearest surface water source on the basis of the edge of the surface water source, we may want to define edge a little bit more clearly. I think with some of the other state agencies, ordinary high water level is generally referenced with permits related to wetlands or stream restoration or those types of things.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments on 0050?
Okay, so finally getting to capacity resource. This is the third component of groundwater is available definition back in division 300. And we we made these changes in an attempt to be responsive to requests to better define passive resource. And the way in which we did that was to colloquially define it as avoid negative impacts. And in trying to find a list of negative impacts, we looked to our definitions in Division 8, which themselves relate to statutory terms. And so the reason that we've come up with these terms and put them in there is because these are the terms that are not otherwise captured in water is available and are listed as negative impacts in the legislative policy section of the Groundwater Act that says that if any of these things exist or impend, then the department shall control groundwater use. And, you know, before we get there, we should not issue additional rights if we think these things are going to exist or impend. And that's where we've captured the remainder of those statutory concerns. We've included overdraw in here as one of those statutory concerns. And I think hopefully go back to Adam's question that I deferred and say that it's in there. We've redefined it more narrowly as a water budget concern. And therefore, if that water budget definition exists or impends, then we will consider that in the allocation process. A couple other things I'll point out is that we have tried to word this with the intent that proposed use is not within the capacity if best available science indicates that these things will happen. So we believe that that statement creates, you know, if these exist and if the data exists and these things are likely or appear to be headed toward happening, then we can make a positive finding of not within the capacity, but we aren't going to have cannot be determined box associated with this. That's not the intent. So.
Robin.
Hi, so sorry if I'm missing something here, but it seemed like we took out impair in other places. And I'm wondering why it's in here and if I'm looking through the definitions and not seeing a definition for significant impairment. Does that exist somewhere?
Under C.
Okay, so thank you for pointing that out. I am not aware that impair is defined, at least with respect to groundwater uses, though I've got maybe one idea where to look. There's a reference to DEQ rules and maybe it's used there. I'd have to check. That's in the statutory policy. We retained this because we wanted to not inadvertently alter the surface water criteria. Since this is a shared definition between surface water and groundwater, you can see that this all used to be one thing, and we have separated out for proposed surface water right, and we've kept the over appropriation definition as it appears later on in Division 400. We've tried to separate groundwater from that definition of over appropriation, and we didn't want to impact the surface water intent, and so we retained C. I take your point that that's still not explicitly defined, and I can another look at that and what we can do. Thanks, Robin.
And then Lisa.
Yeah, so Adam Sussman on behalf of Coco. This is probably the best example of what I was trying to say earlier about really confusing rules where you have kind of definitions pointing to other definitions. And my understanding of best practice of rule writing is to try to avoid doing that. And in doing that, it really confuses me because declined excessively and excessively declining have all kinds of criteria in there about decline numbers and percentages. And it's very confusing to me in terms of how that relates to reasonably stable water levels. And so to me, the whole thing is very hard to follow, very hard to understand. And I think there's other people in this room that agree with me that these rules could be much easier to understand. And one idea might be, you know, earlier I said, take them and just throw them out. I mean, I was kind of joking, but maybe you want to think about just trying to say what it is that you're trying to say. Just help us understand what you're trying to say instead of trying to shoehorn all these statutory terms and definitions that really have to do with designating critical groundwater areas. And maybe you just have a division of rules that's like, these are the rules that we use to make a decision on how to allocate groundwater. In one division where you're just defining terms and criteria that you're trying to use. Because I think you're just setting yourself up for a ton of confusion and lawsuits if you go down this route.
Okay, Lisa?
Yeah, Lisa Brown with Water Watch. To Adam's point, I think, yeah, maybe in addition or instead of a flow chart, maybe having a new rule division that just walks through what is the process here. Kind of like a master rule set they could then refer, because I think there's a lot of great stuff in here, but like having a roadmap that's maybe by rule that outlines what the process is might be helpful, because it is confusing to bounce between these. But on 4 specifically, the capacity of the resource, I've got a couple of kind of big picture comments, and one is if this is defining a balance, how to sustain a balance of public and private uses. I guess it seems like the surface water definition is maybe too narrow, because really you don't have water rights representing the public use in most parts of the state. And then I think that little c is absolutely critical, because otherwise we're back to, for the groundwater piece, not having any rule that protects that piece of the sustainability that's the discharge to streams. So I think the C is critical, and that's how you maybe capture that piece of the definition.
Thank you. Other comments, Zach?
Zach, great, interesting, I couldn't find it. Is function or character defined? Do we know what that is? No, okay. Thanks.
Is that a request for us to define it?
No, that's a request for somebody to enlighten me specifically offline what that tends to mean, historically speaking.
Adam?
One more comment. I don't know if it strikes anyone else, but just the term negative impacts. I mean, I don't know, that just, I mean, an impact is an impact. It just struck me as, I'm not sure what the right word is, judgmental or unnecessary in a rule. If it displays X impact, then it's so, but to call it negative, positive, That's in the eye of the beholder. I'm not sure it's necessary in an administrative role.
Okay, thank you. Any, Tammy?
Okay, I'm going back to the flow chart again, and what I remember from before, Justin, you're explaining, that you're looking at the three things, you're looking at, the stable groundwater levels, and then you're looking at the surface water impairment piece. And then I thought that this third column was a place where we could look to the future a little bit. Do I remember that correctly?
You remember that correctly. I have described it that way in the past. As we have gone through and iterated on the rules and been better defining what is reasonably stable groundwater levels, because that used to exist in statute. It didn't have a specific definition. It was up to hydrogeologist interpretation. And we have looked at, where are things headed to define reasonably stable. Now that we have an explicit definition, the intent is that we look at how things exist with respect to that definition as we look at the application review. So we're trying to define more explicitly and use that forward-looking judgment, thereby less because we have a good definition.
But your definition is only backward looking, right? And
Yeah, that's
of
correct.
course, you assume that if you have an existing trend, it's gonna continue,
Yeah.
but it's never made, never in any of these rules, I think, correct me if this is wrong. Never in any of these rules is there some even attempt to define a period of time into the future for which we are assessing sustainability. Is that true? It's really only
I think that is on which we're assessing sustainability.
Because
I believe that's true.
The word itself,
Yeah.
Sustainable to me implies some forward-looking.
Yeah.
Into the future. But we're gonna project into the future based on these rules, based only on what we know up to this point in time, not taking into account anything we know can reasonably assume about the future other than, say, this, projection of a groundwater trend. Is that fair to say?
I believe that is fair to say, yes.
Yeah, I don't really, I don't know how to fix it, but it just seems to me that that's a deficiency here. That there's nothing that is taking you forward in time, even like 10 years or something, which is quite short, really. So, you can be making these assessments, and be, razor thin at this moment in time, and, 5 years from now, you're gonna be in trouble.
Susan?
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me from this definition is that all of the added language just says, if this happens, there isn't enough capacity, but it doesn't comprehensively deal with that first sentence. And so it seems like to me that in the context of that first sentence, the department can continue to consider anything that goes to the capacity of the resource. So I don't think it narrows the ability of the department with respect to deciding that there isn't sufficient capacity. It simply says, for sure, there isn't sufficient capacity under these circumstances. So to me, it's good because we know with clarity that this is not within the capacity of the resource, but if something in the future comes up that does speak to the first sentence, it can be raised.
Okay. Thank you.
Do I understand you correctly on the regulation correctly on that point?
I think we need to take another look at the language based on the comments. So Zach?
Yeah, thanks, Zach Fried, Nature Conservancy. I appreciated Tammy's comments, and I'm wondering if they can be partly incorporated through the existing language that you proposed here, where it says, if best available science indicates the proposed use will contribute, that doesn't time bound when that contribution could happen, right? When those negative impacts or just impacts could happen. So if best available science is sufficient to show that future hydroclimate projections might suggest that the capacity of the resource will change, or that the proposed use will, I don't know, overdraw or cause decline, excessive declines or something. Is that one pathway to incorporate potential future climate conditions?
We will look at that suggestion.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Adam.
Yeah, I've been meaning to say this for a long time, that maybe I'm not seeing it in the statute. You guys say capacity of the resource, and what the statute says is capacity of available sources. I think there might be some nuanced differences there, so I just want to point that out. That's what the statutory term is, capacity of available sources.
Okay. Other comments on this one? Okay, let's move on.
All right. So from there, no other new changes to Division 400. Again, we took groundwater out of over appropriated. And so that only applies to surface water. 410, again, no major changes between RAC 4 and 5. Again, we took the statements of over appropriated, replaced them with overdrawn, and we, again, this is not only overdrawn with respect to looking at new allocations, but each of the components that we've talked through previously today, Division 300, 8, 9, and 400, all come into this statement where water is available. And then
Adam's.
All right, Adam, go ahead.
Just another example of mass confusion, because now you're looking at other rules of the commission in the context of issuing a groundwater permit. You're in Division 410, and you've got this statement here that it's all of Division 300 the way this is listed. It's all of Division 8. Well, I don't know if it's all of 300. It's definitely all of Division 8. So now you've got to comb the entire Division 8 to figure out whether you're consistent with this policy or not. There's got to be a better way to do this that is more legally sound and more understandable to people that are trying to follow these rules.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? Okay. Thank you all for your review and your thoughtful input. I appreciate it. We are going to move on to the next agenda item, which is our discussion around rulemaking need. And we will have public comment at 11:30. I also intend to go back through RAC members and kind of check in with you before we adjourn. So I think that's how we'll spend the remainder of our time. So Laura.
Okay, so
this should be pretty quick. I'm mostly going to focus on the input that we've received and just note that we're going to continue to take your input and as well as take the input during the public comment period into account when we're looking at the rulemaking need as well as our statements of racial equity impacts and fiscal and economic impacts. Here is just a reminder why we're doing this. It's, you know, and we said this over and over, but, you know, primarily we're looking to protect existing water rights holders as well as manage our resources, both surface water and groundwater, more sustainably. And that's in response to acknowledged declines that we're seeing in terms of groundwater levels as well as overallocated surface water. And then also acknowledging that we have an obligation to preserve the public welfare and that we've been directed specifically by the commission to, you know, modernize our process to address these concerns about protecting existing water rights holders and managing our resources more sustainably. So I'll just pause there for any comments from anybody. This is just rulemaking need, and we'll also acknowledge that there are some other perhaps benefits from conducting this rulemaking. That's not why we're doing it. So.
And if, while people are contemplating feedback, I want to acknowledge for those who have joined us online and are members of the public who would like to present comment, either identify yourself in the chat or when we get to that point, please raise your hand.
I have one comment, Laura, sorry, and I haven't spent a lot of time focusing. It just seems like you might want to sort of articulate the department's sort of balance, you know, like you are protecting existing rights, you're protecting the resource, but you're also an agency that's charged with allocating water for economic development or other things. So I think this rulemaking needs to articulate that the department has a statutory obligation to take a balanced approach to water management. And this could be considered part of your balanced approach, but it's not your only mission.
Thanks for that. Tammy?
Yeah, I would just, in the same, you know, theme as the last comment I made, I would say that, you know, another need that could be articulated is that, you know, we now have better than ever the ability to project our resources into the future, and that those projections indicate in many cases that the availability of water is going to go down, and that, you know, the rule should perhaps take that into account.
I mean, it would be great if, you know, I've seen the comments from Professor Silas from Oregon State about the impacts of climate change. I just, when we have this conversation, I think we should have someone like him from OCRI talk to us about what are the projections for, you know, is water going to be less available than it is now? If so, why is that? Is it because of climate change? I mean, his comments that were provided to the RAC were saying that actually the increases in precipitation that are projected will actually outweigh projected increases in crop demand. So I'm not a climate scientist, but I just feel like if we're going to talk about those things, let's have someone with the credentials to talk about it.
See, Nick's got his hand up.
Yep. Go ahead, Nick.
I'm not speaking for you, Nick. I just
Yeah, no, that's fine. I've sort of been thinking I should chime in here at some point. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to derail this too far, but I guess I will just say, you know, this is an area that is still a very active, or it's a question that's still a very active area of research. But I'll just, I guess, quickly summarize our current best thinking. So Earth system models are able to project both soil moisture and stream flow changes. And in Oregon, there aren't, there's no consensus among these models about how water resources will change. best thinking is it'll probably be about the same. So you have the impacts of increasing evaporation from higher temperatures, but that's partially offset by changes in plant physiology. So I could go into more detail if you want, but I don't think we know enough to base our decisions around what these models project for the future.
Thank you, Nick. And we are reviewing OCRE's latest report. Can we go on to the next one? I don't see any additional comments.
Okay, so with respect to racial equity impacts, and I guess, again, we're limited in terms of looking at the effects of the proposed rules and how that may change racial equity. So how it impacts the way racial equity exists today. During our last RAC meeting, there was a request to provide some information about prior appropriation with respect to racial inequities. And so I've provided a couple of those references. One is from the Secretary of State. It was a review actually of our department. And those sources are both available online. So, and I think that was Bill Yeager had asked for that. He's not here today, but I did want to acknowledge his comment and follow up with him on that. We also had some comments that because part of our objective is to protect existing water rights holders, particularly senior water rights holders, that some tribes may benefit to the extent that they hold those senior rights, and those rights have been recognized. And again, that's a complicated issue. It's different for different tribes, so you don't want to overgeneralize that point, but that point was made, so I want to acknowledge that that was a comment that we received. We got also during our last RAC meeting, there was a comment made that clearly a robust agricultural economy is going to benefit everyone. So because everyone benefits, that at least would have a neutral, if not a beneficial impact on racial equity. And then we got some written comments. I think these might have come from Lisa asking us to take a look at some case studies. And so we welcome, further input if folks have specific case studies that might have more data about racial equity and how it may be affected by our rulemaking. So I'll pause there and see if we've got, well, let me just make one more comment. For racial equity impacts, our department's kind of taking a look at how we want to be more standardized and how we evaluate these impacts, not just for this rulemaking, but for future rulemaking. So we've decided we're going to use kind of a three-pronged approach here. So we're going to take RAC input, all the comments you have on this topic. We're also going to do our own sort of internal qualitative evaluation. And then we're going to openly, in our notice of proposed rulemaking, call for public input on this issue. So that's so that we get, all the best information we can and evaluating our rulemaking impacts on racial equity. Now, Casey.
Yeah, on the equity issue with the tribes, I know this is hugely complex, but the overall trend line as we go into the future, do you see the tribes moving more and more of their treaty rights into officially granted, Oregon granted certificates? Or, I mean, what's the status and where do you see it going? I guess just big picture. I mean,
I don't think I would even want to speculate on that. No, we do have at least 2 tribal representatives on our RAC as well. So
yes.
So I don't want to speak on their behalf, Kelly. Yeah. And Brad Parrish. So yeah, I don't want to comment on that.
I see,
yeah.
I see a lot of movement in Umatilla.
And it's different. Again, you've got,
I think it's something you should try to plan for. I mean, it's, or maybe you can't, so, yeah.
Thank you. I know there are ongoing discussions in Umatilla. I'm not aware of discussions with other tribes. And as Laura, who is our tribal liaison, has noted, there are, the situation is different.
Yeah.
For each of the tribes. Other comments on this piece? Don't see any online, so thank you.
Okay, and then finally, fiscal and economic impacts. The slide just reflects the comments that we received both verbally during our last meeting as well as some written comments. Again, emphasis on the importance of agriculture to our state's economy. There were comments asking us to consider economic benefits from supporting sport and commercial fishing and other in-stream uses. Also, economic benefits derived from maintaining water quality. And then I think, Zach, you made this point, like, don't forget about looking at the cost if you fail to act. So that was a good point and definitely worth considering. And then some examples in terms of, the cost if you have to mitigate because you failed to take, timely action to address an issue, which we're seeing playing out in the Honey Basin. And then also wanted to acknowledge the economic costs for growing municipalities having to meet future water supply needs, and, perhaps having to pivot and be more creative in securing those sources. And then Greg had a.
Oh, yeah, Greg Capillas. So it says here, emphasize the importance of agriculture to the state's economy, but I don't see anything in here about actually evaluating economic costs, to the agricultural community, because certainly there will be significant economic costs for the agriculture when, farmers are not able to get new groundwater rights. I mean, I understand there will be economic benefits to those whose existing senior water rights are going to be better protected. I know I have clients who have both old surface water rights and junior groundwater rights. And if you ask them, I think they would say, hey, I'm willing to accept, maybe a little less protection of my senior surface water rights if I knew that I could still get new groundwater rights. If I wanted to develop some new land or whatever here. I think we have to, again, if you ask them, I think they would say, we're not achieving the proper economic balance here.
Okay.
So I guess I'd like to see not just emphasis, but let's do an evaluation. Can we see an evaluation of those costs to farmers, costs to, all the providers, that provide services to those farmers and drillers, everybody that supports the well drillers, and, everybody else that provides, materials and supplies and services to the agricultural community.
Okay, so couple points. So this slide just represents the input that we received. So we didn't actually get input that identified economic costs. It would be great if you had that input from RAC members. So that's the first thing. I think, we can make a qualitative statement about economic benefits associated with greater certainty, which we hope will be a result of this rulemaking. And so that should help alleviate some of the concerns for some of the, users that are having to make those trade-offs. The other thing is we did just complete a business case assessment, kind of looking at the value of water to the state. And that I think was just finalized within the last week. So, we'll go ahead and put that up on our website. It does have some data in it about, and again, it's mostly going to be the economic value derived from, say, ag irrigation or, different different user groups within the state, and not so much a quantitative assessment of, that differential impact that we might see from the rulemaking. So we're still looking at it. We're still taking input. Any data or information you have, please, send it our way. And, I'll make sure that the business case assessment, I'll even send it out as a link to the RAC members directly so that you get it, quickly.
Jeff?
I would echo that. Debbie Pills, who used to work for the Freshwater Trust, helped deliver that report. It is 260 plus pages, and it is pretty deep. I'm only about 40 pages in because my lips got tired, and so I would just say I would commend you to take a look at it, because I think I appreciate how Pills and the department allowing him to kind of make kind of a whole ecosystem of kind of what water is. And I think they do a pretty good job of parsing out different areas and the differences in each area. So I just commend to you. I want to give, that was part of my final RAC comments, to give the department credit for putting that forward, because while I'm still just barely into it, I would commend you to read it.
We will send it out to the RAC. Other comments on this, Adam?
Yeah, Laura, I think maybe you came up with the economic cost of growing municipalities, or maybe Dave Wildman mentioned that, but I just wanted to, if we're developing a document for the public to read, I think you need to kind of talk about the trickle down impacts of a municipality not having sufficient water, and all the folks that are involved in land use planning and development, and maybe even on kind of equity impacts. It could potentially preclude a community from constructing affordable housing, as an example, which I know is a big push. So if we're gonna put it all out there.
Okay, Lisa?
Oh, yeah, Lisa Brown, and I think on all of these, I think Craig alluded to a little bit, but if you look at the existing system for allocating groundwater rights, it's been injuring the seniors, since the 80s explicitly, right? By not considering the whole impact of the pumping. So
Except in the Deschutes.
well, 2029. So with these, I think it's a two-pronged thing, right? It's municipalities' senior rights have certainly been injured, just like everybody else's, by the existing groundwater allocation system. So just be complete in our analysis.
Okay. Any other comments on this piece?
Zach Freed, Nature Conservancy. One, following up on Adam, I agree that we should be considering equity as a component of this. And I think that the business case for water document that Jeff mentioned earlier had some good information about the distribution and use of domestic wells throughout the state. And so it would be useful to consider the cost of impacting those domestic wells, the cost that would be required to deepen those wells if unsustainable groundwater use continued. And we could look at existing data to a small degree through the wharf well abandonment repair, something.
Yeah.
Replacement fund. So how much has that, how much does it cost for an average wharf applicant? And how could we understand more of those impacts from on a dollar amount of decreasing groundwater levels?
Thank you. Okay, any other comments on this? Okay, we will move to public comment. Glenn, do you have any public comments today?
I guess I'll restate a concern I had at the very beginning, that this isn't just for new groundwater. The rules that we're rewriting here on different divisions do affect or can affect existing water rights for future regulation, especially if we go down the road of critical groundwater, stating how, redefining excessive use or substantial interference does have an impact to existing water rights. And I think just to say that it doesn't affect anything but new water rights is wrong.
Okay, thank you. I do not see anyone online who has indicated a desire to offer public comment. Please raise your hand if you would like to offer public comment. Okay, I do not see any additional members of the public that would like to offer comment. So I think we're gonna close, actually, can we come back to the round table? Let's go to next steps first. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this in response to Casey's question earlier. We will have a RAC meeting number 6, which is scheduled for September 13th. We will be downstairs in the big room for that meeting. It will be here same time, 8:30 to noon. Our intention is to start the 90-day public comment period, November 1st. We will have several public hearings. We have not scheduled the locations yet, but our initial discussions have been to go to the same locations where we had the informational sessions about groundwater allocation. So that would be Central Point, Medford, Bend, LeGrand, and then we had a virtual meeting here in Salem to hold public hearings there. The last day of the public comment period is proposed to be February 1st. And that then gives us time to review comments and make changes as needed for the commission to consider something in March. So that's kind of our tentative schedule. Let's go back. Let's go to the next slide, please. So here are the topics that, in addition to the comments that we heard from you today, we know that we need to come back and talk about aquifer recharge, aquifer storage and recovery. It's come up a couple of times, so we want to be clear about answering your questions there. We also will talk about limited licenses and drought permits. We will have a draft application review form for you to look at, along with a flow chart. We might get the flow chart done sooner again, and we will think about the comments that were presented today about how to maybe group these things in a way that is clearer. You know, we'll work on that. And then the other thing I wanted to queue up is Division 25 is a division of rules that apply to the Klamath Basin that were invalidated by a court decision. So we would like to, as part of this rulemaking, take those off the books. So I just want to cue that up for you. It's not really a substantive decision. It's more of a housekeeping item. So I wanted you to know to expect that. So if you have additional comments that you would like to submit to us in writing, if you could please do that by close of business August 11th. We do intend to have review by the Department of Justice prior to our next meeting on the 13th of September as well. So that's part of what is kind of driving some of these scheduling dates. So with that, why don't we move and do a RAC roundtable? So any other comments that you want to offer that you haven't offered? And again, let's see, we've got some people we've got some comments in the chat. Susan said good night, and Phil Brown left. So I'm going to alternate again between individuals who are online and individuals in the room. And I am going to start online this time. Cheyenne, are you still with us? Any other comments, feedback on the meeting, anything you want to share with this group before we adjourn today?
I am here. I have no comments at this time. Thank you, though.
Okay, thank you. And Adam, we'll start with you this time.
I'll just reiterate everything I've already said. I think we can do a lot better.
Okay.
Way better.
Dave.
Yes, I have no further comment at this time.
Thank you.
Thank
Jeff?
you.
Jeff Stone, OAN. I'm gonna channel my inner Joe Whitworth from the Freshwater Trust. That every bit of water that's on this planet is already here. And so as things, as precipitation changes, it's what form is it going to take, right? And so how do we then make use of all that precipitation and water for multiple uses? So that's one, and that's Joe will call me later and ask me never to mention his name again. But I have two other quick. How do we incentivize? Because I think the rules will do one thing, but I think incentivizing ag operations and others to be more efficient, conserve, will get, I think, a lot more down the road to try to preserve and extend the resource. Nurseries use holding ponds, for example, that they use it several times, goes back into the water cleaner than when they got it. But they do that just because it made sense. So how do we incentivize and try to urge greater efforts amongst the broader ag community? Because I really think that we can do all this and set all the rules up, but I think that's where the difference is going to be. And then lastly, I want to let you know that I will submit comments on some of the economic challenges. We do talk about that in other forums, so I'm happy to do so.
Thank you. Karen?
I am still here. Thank you. I am going to be submitting written comments. I always learn a lot at these meetings, and I appreciate the accumulated thoughtfulness that I hear when I'm listening, so that it helps me actually craft my thoughts and my comments better towards turning in written comments. So I appreciate everybody's contributions, and you'll be hearing from me in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, I enjoyed all the discussion today. I'm very supportive of these rules. I think there's a lot of really great stuff in here. It's well thought out. I do think we need some cohesive roadmap to help people understand the connections, whether that's another rule division or an additional piece of one of these. And other than that, I will submit written comments as well. And yeah, thanks for the meeting.
Thank you. Kelly Warren.
Yes, thank you. First want to say I appreciate the effort of the department to protect senior water rights. And I also appreciate my fellow RAC members' insightful comments today. I do not have anything to contribute, so we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you. Tammy?
Yeah, I think the rules are on the right track. I think, I really appreciate all the effort that the department is putting into it. I also very much appreciate the engagement of the RAC members. And I do enjoy the discussion and the back and forth. And I think these are going to be a big improvement.
Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate, I guess, what I said before, just that future projections are uncertain. So I, for one, would be uncomfortable making decisions based on those model projections. I agree with the proposed rules that I've seen that are based just on the historical trends. And I think the 5 to 20 year timescale makes sense. I don't have any changes that I would recommend to that. I guess I just worry a bit about the potential for over allocation. For example, if like permits were granted during or after a phase of natural variability that was unusually wet, and that could, potentially give the false impression that water is more plentiful than it is. So again, I guess I don't have a concrete suggestion for that. It's just a thought that comes to mind. 20 years is a relatively short period, I guess, in the grand scheme of natural variability.
Thank you. Jen?
Yeah, Jen Hubert, Deschutes River Conservancy.
I'm one of those people who needs to marinate on things before I make a lot of comments. So we will be submitting written comments. But I really appreciate OWRD staff and all the efforts put into this rulemaking, as well as the RAC member contributions and the discussions that were civil over this topic. I just kind of want to recognize too that there's a kind of a disconnect, at least in the shoots, on land use planning and water availability. Like, I don't think our county commissioners really understand how our water rights function and how the mitigation program can or may not actually supply enough water for some, development that they're allowing. I'm thinking resorts that have incremental development plans and things like that, but I don't know how to address that. Probably not really, it's not within this RAC, but it's an issue. And then also in our basin, I know exempt wells aren't part of this, but I know there are some areas that have gotten around the mitigation program by putting in clustered exempt wells. So I don't know how to address that either, but just a few things.
Thank you. And I'll note that the Water Resources Commission is keenly interested on the relationship between land use and water resources planning. So, and we don't have any other RAC members who are with us still online. So I'm just going to go to the remaining three. Greg?
Okay, Greg Capillas. Yeah, I want to acknowledge the efforts of the department and it's a lot of work and appreciate the professionalism of the staff and the whole process and all the contributions from the RAC members. One of the biggest concerns I have about these rules is in Division 8 here, where substantial interference occurs if pumping contributes to depletion or contributes to removal or extraction of water from a surface water source that's already over appropriate during any period of the year. I mean, to me, that's kind of the elephant in the room. We can talk about all this other stuff, stable water levels and other things, but if there's a hydraulic connection and if the models are run and to run out to forever, they're going to show that there's going to be an impact, and then it's game over because of this rule here. And so we're relying completely on the water availability data that's in the system right now for that water availability basin. And I'm not confident that the WAB data are an accurate reflection of the amount of water that's available in the stream. And one of the reasons is because, as I understand it, that basically the department applies the paper water rights, the full value of the paper water rights, but they do, I think, adjust for consumptive use. But nevertheless, for all the surface water rights that are taking, all the surface water rights that are taking water from that WAB, the amount is based on the full amount of paper water rights. And that's, it's just not a reality. I mean, the fact is, in the Willamette Basin, it may be different in other parts of the state, but in the Willamette Valley, farmers typically don't use more than 1.5 acre-feet per acre. I mean, this is well known. And it just seems to me like, by applying the full paper water rights, we are grossly overestimating the amount of water that's being taken out of the streams. Now, of course, I don't know to what extent the WAB accounts for cumulative impacts from groundwater usage. And so that's another thing that, that has to be factored into that. But it just seems to me that, first of all, we are able apparently to estimate cumulative impacts from groundwater pumping for scenic waterways. So why can't we do the same thing, for just, groundwater, regular groundwater appropriations? And we also have, a lot of water use data available, actual water use data. Why can't we use that water use data to come up with, kind of more accurate estimates, I think, of how much water farmers are actually using, in a given area. It's like, hey, let's actually use vast amount of water use data that we've been collecting over the years. As opposed to just assuming that they're using their full 2.5 acre feet per acre, which we know they don't. You know, let's look at what are they actually using? What does the data actually show us? You know, I mean, I think that it seems like we're putting the cart before the horse here. You know, we're relying on a water system that I think is really not reliable. And that I think should concern all of us. And then the only other couple of quick things that I had was, actually one more thing. In the document here that sort of summarized comments and so forth. I had made a comment about the possibility of issuing 5-year limited licenses if there was, you know, like not enough water level data available to make a determination. Issue a 5-year, I suggested issuing a 5-year limited license and allow the applicant the opportunity anyway to maybe gather the data. Department said they were considering that, but this says here statutory authority does not authorize time limited permits for irrigation. And I guess I would argue that the department does in fact issue 5-year limited licenses for irrigation. Okay, and that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Zach?
Yeah, I just want to echo all the comments saying that, you know, really appreciate all the efforts on behalf of the department to keep this process moving, to go through these proposals and provide suggestions that are really data-based, data-driven, and founded upon good, rigorous science. One thing that's really stuck out to me is that this whole committee has been a really, really solid argument in favor of trying to invest more in the data and our understanding of water resources across the state, and trying to invest more funding and provide more capacity for the department itself and the department's partners who are going out there and collecting this information. That includes the need for more sentinel wells so we can develop periods of record that will be useful in different groundwater reservoirs or aquifers. I forget which term is used in the rule right now, but to understand those trends over time. It includes WARS updates that Greg mentioned. Like, these are really important things, and they benefit everybody, no matter who you're representing or what your interest in water is. We really need to get that better understanding of how water is being used across the state. So it's just another great argument in favor of things like water use measurement and finding a platform for the department or others to be able to collect that information. I'm excited about these rules. I think they're a step in the right direction. I've submitted comments. I think providing evidence that these rules could be justifiably more strict, I suppose would be the right word. But I appreciate the steps in the right direction that the department is taking. This is going to be a big improvement in terms of not making the problem worse, where the problem here is over allocation and unsustainable use of groundwater. So it's not going to fix places in Oregon that have already suffered from over allocation and continue to grapple with unsustainable water use, but it'll help us prevent more of those places popping up in the future. So I really appreciate that direction that the department is taking.
Thank you, Casey.
Yeah, I want to thank the department for, you know, well-run meetings and responsiveness and patience. But I'm also a big fan of Adam's mantra of simplicity and making them logical and as simple as possible. That may be an impossible goal, but it's worth thinking about. I think we as the department and the community, we should be devoting a little more time thinking about the impact of tribal activities in the water rights area. I think it's going to be very, very impactful. Lastly, minor point, I just want to make sure it wasn't ambiguous about my wish for 9C on slide 26 to remain in regulation. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. We look forward to seeing you again on the 13th of September. And with that, I think we're ready to adjourn.